Expectation Equivalence. Trap is the silent belief that our expectations are not just hopes or preferences, but rules the world should follow. It's the unconscious conviction that if we imagine something a certain way, reality owes us that outcome. And when life inevitably disobeys, we feel wronged, betrayed, or broken, as if some sacred agreement has been violated. Expectation Equivalence Trap. This trap begins innocently. We plan, we dream, we visualize. We do everything the self-help books tell us. Picture success, map out goals, speak the future into existence. But what they rarely say is this: your expectations aren't contracts. The world didn't sign them. Life doesn't read your mind, and it certainly doesn't rearrange itself to match your internal blueprint. When you confuse desire with destiny, you begin to suffer every time reality dares to show up differently than you demanded. This trap becomes cruel because it disguises itself as ambition or hope, but what it really breeds is resentment. You start measuring your life not by what it is, but by how far it deviates from your fantasy. A relationship becomes a failure because it didn't look like the one in your head. A career feels like a waste because it didn't unfold in the timeline you expected. You begin punishing yourself, or worse, others, for not living up to standards they never agreed to. What hurts isn't what happened. What hurts is the collision between what is and what was supposed to be. We don't mourn reality, we mourn the death of our expectations. And in that space, bitterness, anxiety, and paralysis quietly take root. You start to hesitate before hoping again, because now hope feels dangerous. You confuse disappointment with meaning, assuming that if something hurts, it must be wrong. But maybe it only hurts because it was never promised. Maybe nothing failed. You just expected something that was never guaranteed. Emotional Certainty Trap. The emotional certainty trap is the illusion that the strength of a feeling confirms its truth. It's the seductive pull of believing that if something feels intense, fear, love, dread, certainty, it must mean something absolute. Your emotions don't whisper in your ear, they scream, and the louder they are, the more you trust them, mistaking volume for accuracy. This trap is dangerous because emotions aren't truth tellers, they're storytellers. They don't report facts, they report your current perception of reality. When you're anxious, your brain becomes a threat detector. When you're hurt, your mind rewrites history to find villains. When you're infatuated, you see signs and soulmates where there may be none. In those moments, what you feel is real, but that doesn't mean it's true. Your brain interprets emotional intensity as urgency, as proof, as revelation. You think, if I feel this insecure, I must be inadequate. If I feel this angry, someone must have wronged me. If I feel this in love, it must be fate. But emotions are weather systems, not truths. They pass through. They can storm, they can blind, they can flood, but they are not maps. And when you treat them as such, you lose your compass. You say things you regret. You burn bridges you needed. You stay in situations because your feelings are too strong to leave, or you leave too fast because the pain feels too big to bear. The heart has volume, not vision, and in the silence after the storm, you often look around and realize what felt undeniable wasn't real, it was just loud. Narrative bias. Narrative bias is the deeply human impulse to make sense of life by turning it into a story, complete with arcs, meanings, villains, victories, and inevitable conclusions. We aren't content with random events or chaos. We need a thread, a reason, a plot. And so we invent one. Even when life doesn't make sense, we force it to. This bias starts quietly. A breakup isn't just a breakup. It becomes the moment you finally realized your worth. A failure isn't a misstep. It's the universe redirecting you to something better. A toxic person wasn't just mean. They were the antagonist in your coming-of-age story. We retrofit meaning onto moments, stitching them together into a tale we can live with. It gives us comfort, control, and identity, but it can also trap us. because stories require structure, and real life doesn't care for that. What we leave out, what we exaggerate, what we reinterpret, it all builds a version of reality that serves the story, not the truth. You might cast yourself as the eternal victim, the cursed soul, or soul, the unlovable misfit, not because it's accurate, but because it's narratively satisfying. It explains your pain, it gives it a cause. But these stories become prisons. You start seeing your life not as it is, but as it must be to continue the script. You sabotage peace because your story requires struggle. You push away love because your character isn't meant for it yet. You suffer more than you need to because you're trying to stay consistent with the role you wrote for yourself. And worst of all, you begin to believe your own fiction. The plot becomes prophecy. You don't just tell the story, you live it, even when it no longer fits, even when it's hurting you. Substitution fallacy. The substitution fallacy is the mental sleight of hand where your brain swaps out difficult, soul-searching questions for simpler ones without telling you. You ask yourself, am I fulfilled? But the silence that follows is too heavy, too complex. So without realizing it, your mind answers a different question. Am I busy? Am I productive? Do I look successful? And because those answers are easier to measure, you accept them as truth. This trap is devastating because it feels responsible. You keep moving, striving, doing. You tell yourself you're building a life, but often you're just building noise to drown out the questions that might change everything. You confuse momentum with meaning, calendar clutter with purpose. You feel restless, but you call it drive. You feel numb, but you call it discipline. And slowly, you lose sight of the life you wanted to live, buried under the life that's easiest to justify. The mind craves resolution. It doesn't like ambiguity. So when asked questions like, am I loved? Do I matter? Am I living in alignment with who I am? It panics. It reaches for what it can quantify instead. How many emails did I send? How much money did I make? Did I check off enough boxes today to feel like I'm enough? But the ache remains. It's the quiet weight you feel at night when there's nothing left to distract you. It's the sinking suspicion that something essential is missing, even if you're doing everything right. The questions you avoid never stop asking themselves. They just whisper while you're busy performing. Chronic comparison trap. The chronic comparison trap is the corrosive habit of measuring your entire life against carefully curated fragments of other people's. It's the illusion that you're falling behind, failing, or not enough based on glimpses, a photo, a promotion, a relationship update. Someone's best 5 seconds become the yardstick for your whole identity, and suddenly your joy feels counterfeit, your progress too slow, your life insufficient. This trap thrives in silence. You don't announce it. You don't say, I just saw her post and now I feel like I don't matter. But that's what happens. Your brain starts a highlight reel war, and you're always the loser. You scroll, you smile, and you sink. Not because you hate others, but because some part of you believes their light dims yours. Their happiness must mean you're behind. Their love must mean you're alone. Their success must mean you failed. But what you're comparing isn't real. You're holding up your backstage to someone else's stage lighting. You're judging your worth in the middle of your mess by someone else's filtered moment. You forget that people showcase results, not struggle. That behind every image is effort, pain, self-doubt. But the trap convinces you that you're the only one not doing it right, that your flaws are permanent and theirs don't exist. And then you start adjusting, not to become more you, but to be more them. You shift your goals to match their timeline. You post more to seem happier. You stop appreciating your own life because it doesn't get the same applause. Comparison doesn't just steal joy, it steals identity. And in chasing someone else's life, you risk losing your own. Ambiguity aversion. Ambiguity aversion is the deeply rooted instinct to treat uncertainty not as a neutral unknown, but as a threat. When the outcome isn't clear, your mind doesn't calmly wait to see. It rushes in, fills the gap with fear, and declares, if I don't know what's happening, it must be bad. In that split second, uncertainty becomes danger, and that false equivalence controls more of your life than you realize. This trap was born to keep us alive. Our ancestors didn't survive by being curious about rustling bushes. They survived by assuming it was a predator. But what protected them now suffocates us. In modern life, uncertainty isn't a tiger. It's a late reply, a confusing tone in someone's voice, a new job, a slow month, a quiet relationship. But the body doesn't know the difference. Your nervous system lights up, your thoughts spiral, and you prepare for loss. Even if nothing is actually wrong, we convince ourselves that certainty is safety, that having answers will bring peace, and so we rush into premature conclusions, impulsive decisions, or endless overthinking, all to avoid the unbearable discomfort of not knowing. You stay in jobs you've outgrown because the unknown feels riskier than the unhappiness. You cling to people who no longer align with you because the silence of uncertainty screams louder than the noise of dissatisfaction. Ambiguity aversion tricks you into mistaking confusion for failure, silence for rejection, and waiting for wasting time. It replaces patience with panic, but uncertainty is not your enemy. It is the birthplace of every possibility you claim to want. Growth begins in the spaces you haven't figured out yet, but until you can sit with the ambiguity, you'll keep running back to the familiar, even when it hurts. Effort equates worth trap. The effort equates worth trap is the deeply ingrained belief that the harder you try, the more life owes you in return. It feels just. It feels fair. If you stay up late, give your all, push through pain, and sacrifice endlessly, then surely success, love, and recognition will follow, because effort is supposed to equal outcome, right? That's what you were taught. But life is not a vending machine. You don't insert hours and automatically receive reward. Sometimes you give everything and still get nothing. You love deeply and still get left. You prepare completely and still fail. You show up, bleed, try again, and the world shrugs. And that's when this trap cuts deepest, because not only are you exhausted, you feel betrayed. You begin to think, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I didn't try hard enough. Maybe I need to suffer more to deserve better. The pain comes not just from rejection or failure, but from the collapse of a belief system. You did everything right, so why is your life still not unfolding the way you hoped? You were promised that effort equals worth, and when it doesn't pay off, you don't blame the system. You blame yourself. You push harder, work longer, love more desperately. You exhaust yourself trying to earn something that maybe was never yours to control. But the truth is brutal. Effort doesn't always guarantee results. Worth is not performance, and the universe doesn't tally your suffering like points. Sometimes the outcome has nothing to do with how much you gave, and that doesn't make you weak or unworthy. It makes you human in a world that doesn't always reward fairness. Self-diagnosis fallacy. The self-diagnosis fallacy is the quiet conviction that the labels you give yourself based on moods, patterns, or late-night internet searches are definitive truths. It's the slippery moment when I feel off turns into I have depression, when I overthink becomes I have anxiety, when I struggle to focus becomes I must be ADHD. And once the label sticks, it doesn't just explain your experience, it begins to shape it. This trap feels like self-awareness, but it's often self-containment. You want to understand why you feel the way you do, and that hunger is real. But in the rush for answers, you bypass complexity and grab hold of certainty. A label offers relief. It organizes the chaos. It gives your pain a name, but it also gives your identity a script, one that can quietly limit your possibilities. Instead of saying, I'm feeling low today, you say, I'm a depressive person. Instead of noticing distraction, you define yourself by it, and you begin to see your entire life through the narrow lens of a diagnosis you gave yourself in isolation, without professional reflection or nuance. The danger is not in naming what you feel, it's in believing that name is final, that your experience must conform to a checklist, that because a post or a quiz described you, it must be you. You stop exploring, stop questioning, stop healing, because now the diagnosis explains everything. But explanation is not resolution. You are not broken just because you're struggling. You are not a label just because you're searching. Sometimes the mind is loud. Sometimes it's tired. Sometimes it's scared. That doesn't mean it's ill. It means it's human. Concept Identity Trap. The concept identity trap is the quiet confusion between what you believe and who you are. It's the habit of wrapping your sense of self around ideas, traits, roles, or even diagnoses until you forget there's someone underneath them. You start to think in labels. I'm an introvert. I'm a thinker. I'm anxious. I'm a creative. I'm a survivor. But what begins as self-understanding soon becomes self-limiting. This trap doesn't feel like a trap at first. It feels like clarity, like finally having language for what you felt all along. You find comfort in calling yourself something. It gives you edges, a shape, a narrative. But slowly, the label becomes a cage. You stop asking, "Who am I becoming?" and start defending, "This is who I am." You resist change, not because it's wrong, but because it threatens the identity you've built. You cling to struggle because it's part of your story. You reject growth because it feels like betrayal. You confuse consistency with authenticity. But the self is not a fixed idea. It's not a list of adjectives. It's not your Enneagram type or your trauma or your favorite philosophy. Those are fragments. They help describe you, but they are not you. The deeper self is fluid, unfinished, and inconveniently complex. But the trap tells you to simplify, to pick a lane, to commit to the persona, even when it no longer fits. And that's how you begin to shrink. You stop trying new things because they don't match the concept. You dismiss unfamiliar thoughts because they don't align with your identity. You hold on to pain because healing would change the story. And without realizing it, you become more loyal to the label than to your own becoming. Familiarity equals truth trap. The familiarity equals truth trap is the unconscious belief that if something feels familiar, it must be right, safe, or true. It's the pull of comfort dressed up as clarity, the sense that what you've known, even if it's painful, must somehow be more valid than what's unknown. You stop asking, "Is this good for me?" and start defaulting to, "Well, this is what I'm used to." This trap is dangerous because familiarity can feel like love, even when it's harm. Chaos can feel like home if that's what you grew up in. Self-doubt can feel like honesty if that's how you were taught to see yourself. Dysfunction doesn't scream, "I'm hurting you." It whispers, "This is normal." And so you stay in patterns, in relationships, in versions of yourself that feel safe only because they're familiar, not because they're true. The brain craves repetition. It's wired to choose predictability over growth, even if that predictability slowly kills your spirit. That's why you're drawn to people who treat you like someone from your past. That's why new opportunities feel suspicious, while old pain feels oddly comforting. You confuse the absence of discomfort with the presence of truth, but just because something doesn't scare you doesn't mean it's right, and just because something feels foreign doesn't mean it's wrong. You start to build your reality around what you expect to be true, not what actually is. And anything that challenges those expectations, kindness that feels undeserved, love that doesn't require suffering, peace that doesn't come after chaos, feels like a lie. Not because it is, but because your nervous system hasn't felt it before. And so you reject the very things that could heal you because healing feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar still feels unsafe. Deficit framing. Deficit framing is the mental lens that filters your entire life through what's absent. It's the silent belief that what you don't have defines what you are. You wake up and immediately notice the lack, the money not earned, the love not found, the goals not reached, the body not perfect, the happiness not felt, and that absence becomes your identity. You live in a constant state of not enough. This trap is subtle because it disguises itself as motivation. You tell yourself you're just being honest, setting goals, trying to improve, but what you're really doing is anchoring your self-worth to avoid. You start measuring your days by what's missing from them instead of what's inside them. Even joy becomes tainted because it's never quite complete. There's always something left to fix, earn, or prove. You can't rest because rest feels like surrender. You can't feel proud because pride feels like settling. There's always more to chase and never enough to claim. And over time, it empties you because when you live through deficit, you stop seeing yourself as a whole person. You become a list of gaps, a walking absence. Every win is just a pause before the next reminder of what you lack. You compare, you strive, you scroll, and everything is just a mirror of your own perceived incompletion. Even love, when it comes, feels undeserved. Even peace, when it visits, feels suspicious. Deficit framing isn't just a thought pattern, it's a theft. It robs you of the ability to feel full, even for a moment. It turns growth into punishment. It turns potential into shame. And worst of all, it convinces you that who you are right now can never be enough until something else is added. Fixation Trap. The fixation trap is the rigid belief that life must unfold in one specific way for it to be meaningful, successful, or worthwhile. It's the silent attachment to a single outcome, a career, a relationship, a version of yourself you imagined years ago, and the refusal to let it go, even as everything around you shifts. You don't just want a future, you want that future, and anything less feels like failure. This trap doesn't shout. It whispers in your decisions, your sacrifices, your quiet desperation to stay on track. You tell yourself it's determination, that sticking to your plan is a virtue, but beneath it is fear, the fear that if this doesn't work, then who will you be? If this dream dies, then what was all the effort for? So you keep pushing, even when it drains you, even when it no longer fits. You start to confuse purpose with persistence. You ignore signs that you've outgrown the thing you once loved. You silence the part of you that's whispering there might be something else because that voice threatens the story you've committed to. And the longer you've clung to it, the harder it becomes to admit that it might not be right anymore. You worry that changing your mind makes you weak, that walking away means you wasted time. So you stay, you chase, you fixate. But fixation isn't clarity, it's captivity. It doesn't come from vision, it comes from fear of losing control. And as the world changes, you don't bend with it, you break. Because when your identity is fused to a single outcome, any deviation feels like death. You don't just mourn a dream, you mourn yourself. And the scariest part isn't letting go. It's not knowing who you'll be without the thing you thought you had to become. Symptom Confusion Trap. The symptom confusion trap is the mistake of mistaking the smoke for the fire, treating emotional symptoms like boredom, anxiety, irritability, or sadness as the core problem instead of signs pointing to something deeper. You feel restless, so you switch jobs. You feel anxious, so you cancel plans. You feel bored, so you distract yourself. And on the surface, it looks like you're taking action, but in reality, you're treating a signal as if it's the source. This trap is seductive because symptoms feel urgent. They demand your attention. They make your skin crawl, your mind race, your body tighten. You want relief now. So you address the surface. You chase stimulation when you're bored. You seek control when you're anxious. You blame your relationship, your job, your surroundings. But the real question never gets asked. What is this feeling trying to tell me? Not fix, not silence, just understand. Boredom might not mean your life is dull. It might mean your soul is starving for meaning. Anxiety might not mean you're broken. It might mean you're out of alignment. Sadness might not be the problem. It might be the grief beneath the surface that's never had room to breathe. But if you treat these emotions like errors instead of messengers, you never reach the truth. You medicate confusion, you rearrange symptoms, you patch leaks without ever finding the crack in the pipe. And slowly, the real problems rot underneath. Because symptoms that are silenced without understanding don't disappear. They just grow louder. Until one day, nothing feels right anymore, and you don't know why. You've treated the noise so long, you forgot to ask what was making it. Urgency equals importance trap. The urgency equals importance trap is the deceptive belief that the things screaming loudest are also the things that matter most. It's the emotional hijack that makes your heart race at every notification, your brain spiral with every deadline, and your life feel like a constant emergency room, always tending to the next fire, never asking if it should be burning at all. This trap thrives in chaos. You confuse movement with meaning. You sprint from task to task, convinced that responding quickly proves you're responsible, successful, in control, but what you're really doing is reacting, not choosing. Your schedule is full, but your soul is empty. You check everything off the list, but can't remember why those things mattered in the first place. And somewhere in the rush, the things that actually matter, connection, reflection, peace, purpose, get drowned in the noise of what's due, what's late, what's next. Urgency manipulates your nervous system. It tricks you into thinking speed is virtue. You feel adrenaline and call it clarity. You feel pressure and call it purpose. But all urgency does is collapse your world into the immediate. It shrinks your attention span, shortens your breath, and makes you chase tasks instead of direction. You stop living from your values and start living from your inbox. And the hardest part is, the rewards look real. People praise your responsiveness. The system values your speed. But when the rush ends, you're left with a question no one can answer for you. Did any of it matter? The clock always resets. The pressure always returns. And unless you break the trance, you'll keep racing faster and faster toward a finish line you never chose. Growth guilt trap. The growth guilt trap is the quiet, aching shame that creeps in when you begin to outgrow the people, places, or beliefs that once defined you. It's the inner conflict of expanding while staying loyal. You evolve, but part of you whispers, "Who do you think you are?" You feel guilt not for doing something wrong, but for becoming someone new. This trap binds you to your past out of misplaced responsibility. You worry that growing means abandoning, that changing your mind means betraying your old self, or worse, those who never changed with you. So you stay small. You pretend. You shrink to fit the version of you that others still recognize. You say yes to conversations that bore you. You laugh at jokes that don't land. You nod along with values that no longer feel true. And each time, something inside you wilts. Growth isn't clean. It's messy and lonely and often misunderstood. The more you stretch into who you're becoming, the more distance you feel from who you were. And that distance can look like disloyalty to others. But the guilt doesn't come from doing harm. It comes from the fear of being seen as unrecognizable. You fear being called selfish for choosing yourself, arrogant for questioning the belief system you were raised in, cold for letting go of a friendship that's rooted in an outdated version of you. But you are not cruel for changing. You are not disloyal for healing. You're just becoming more of who you really are. And the people who love the real you will find you again. The ones who don't were only ever in love with your echo. Mystery equals threat trap. The mystery equals threat trap is the primal reflex to label anything unknown as dangerous. It's the mental habit of recoiling from uncertainty, not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. Your brain craves patterns, explanations, labels, and when it can't find one, it panics. It fills the void with fear. What you don't understand becomes something to defend against rather than something to explore. This trap is ancient, wired into your survival instincts. Once, not knowing meant danger, a shadow in the dark, a rustle in the trees, an unfamiliar face. So your mind learned to treat the unknown as a possible predator. But now, the threat isn't a wild animal. It's a new idea, a different culture, an unfamiliar feeling, a moment you can't control. And yet the same reflex kicks in. You tense up, you withdraw, you say, "This doesn't feel right," when what you really mean is this doesn't feel familiar. And that's where possibility quietly dies, because what you call wrong might just be new. What you label weird might be wisdom you haven't touched yet. You miss out on growth, on love, on transformation, not because they weren't available, but because they didn't look like what you already knew. You cling to certainty like armor, even when it cuts you. You choose the known pain over the unknown truth. You silence mystery with judgment before it can speak. But the unknown is not your enemy. It's your edge. It's where life begins again. It's the space where you're invited to become more than what you've been. And if you can sit in that space without rushing to define or destroy it, you'll find that not everything unfamiliar is a threat. Sometimes it's the key. The one true way trap. The one true way trap is the illusion that there is a single correct path to a good life. And if you don't find it, follow it, and stick to it perfectly, you've failed. It's the belief that success, love, or happiness only come through a narrow, predefined formula. You're told there's a right timeline, a right relationship, a right job, and that straying from it is risky, wrong, or wasteful. This trap starts early. You're handed a script. Go to school, get the job, find the person, have the family, retire, be grateful. You're told this is what a fulfilling life looks like. And if you don't want that, or you want it differently, confusion sets in. You wonder if something's wrong with you. You question your joy if it doesn't look like the packaged version you were promised. You begin to chase someone else's dream, thinking it will fix your emptiness. And this trap is especially cruel because it steals your permission to explore. It makes you suspicious of detours, doubtful of intuition, and terrified of uncertainty. You stay in jobs that numb you because they're secure. You cling to relationships that fit the mold but starve the soul. You shut down wild ideas because they don't match the template. You label your unique path as a mistake just because it's not the one everyone else is on. But there is no universal blueprint. What brings one person peace might cage another. What lights you up may never make sense on paper. Still, the trap convinces you that deviation means failure, that your life must be justified by external metrics, that only the well-worn road leads home. So, you keep walking it, even as it leads you further from yourself. Relief equals resolution trap. The relief equals resolution trap is the quiet deception that feeling better means being better. It's the moment you postpone the hard conversation, cancel the meeting, avoid the mirror, and feel the tension lift. That breath of relief tricks you into believing you made the right choice. But relief is not resolution. It's just a pause, a numbing, a sigh that comes from avoidance, not healing. This trap is seductive because relief feels like proof. The pressure in your chest loosens, your mind quiets down, and for a fleeting second, the weight disappears. You tell yourself you needed it, you deserved it, and maybe you did, but the problem is still sitting there, unchanged, waiting. The email you avoided writing, the boundary you refused to set, the truth you couldn't face. You mistake silence for peace, delay for strategy, comfort for clarity. Procrastination, distraction, indulgence. These are not sins. They're human. But when you start to believe they fix something, you lose track of what's real. You confuse emotional anesthesia for progress, and you build your life around dodging discomfort instead of transforming it. The hard part is still coming. Only now it's heavier, sharper, charged with shame, because every time you trade resolution for relief, you reinforce the belief that you're not capable of facing what hurts. And over time, you become allergic to your own growth. You never develop the muscle to sit with fear, to walk through fire. You just learn how to hide better, to escape faster. And what started as self-preservation becomes self-sabotage, not because you're weak, but because you trusted the feeling of awe instead of the hard-earned freedom of done. Concept Cramming Trap. The concept cramming trap is the mental habit of stuffing your life with abstract theories, philosophies, and frameworks until your choices feel more like academic exercises than human experiences. You try to think your way into clarity, applying models to your relationships, life stages, and identity like they're equations to be solved. You turn love into attachment theory, work into purpose diagrams, healing into trauma maps, and somewhere along the way, you stop living your life. You start analyzing it to death. This trap preys on intelligent, self-aware minds. You crave understanding. You want to make the right choice, so you gather concepts like armor, psychological tools, spiritual systems, personality types, productivity hacks. You search for the perfect lens that will finally explain everything. But what you're really doing is stalling, because lived experience is messy, contradictory, and uncertain, and theories promise structure, control, safety, but concepts are not reality. They are reflections of it. They point toward understanding, but they cannot replace feeling. You can know every detail about emotional regulation and still not know how to stay in the room when someone cries. You can study detachment and still feel shattered when someone leaves. You can intellectualize your patterns and still repeat them, because until you move through the experience, it stays theoretical. And the trap is this: the more you rely on ideas to guide you, the more disconnected you become from your own instinct. You start to trust the framework more than your feelings, the theory more than your truth, the map more than the terrain. So you hesitate, you wait for clarity, you drown in insight. But life isn't waiting for you to solve it. It's begging you to live it, not as a hypothesis, as a heartbeat. Peace equals stagnation trap. The peace equals stagnation trap is the mistaken belief that calm means you're falling behind, that stillness is laziness, and that if things aren't chaotic, they must be meaningless. It's the quiet fear that when your life finally stops spinning, something must be missing. You've been wired to associate movement with purpose, tension with progress, urgency with value. So when peace arrives, soft, quiet, undemanding, you panic. You start scanning for what's wrong. You sabotage what's right. You mistake stability for mediocrity. You feel restless in the absence of struggle, as if life is only real when you're clawing your way through it. You start craving the drama you said you wanted to escape. You poke holes in your own happiness, not because it's flawed, but because it doesn't feel familiar. You've been conditioned to believe that stress means you're working hard, that exhaustion means you're succeeding, that pressure is proof you're growing. But all that means is you've confused adrenaline for aliveness. So when peace comes, you feel guilty, or bored, or lost. You tell yourself something's off, something's missing, but maybe, for once, nothing is wrong. Maybe the discomfort you feel isn't a lack of meaning, but the absence of noise. Maybe you don't know what life feels like without the chaos, and that scares you more than you want to admit. Because peace isn't the absence of passion, it's the space where clarity has room to speak, but you'll miss it if you're too busy filling the silence. You'll run from the very thing your soul is begging for, not because you don't want peace, but because no one ever taught you how to feel safe in it. Scarcity of time trap. The scarcity of time trap is the relentless belief that there's never enough time, that life is always slipping through your fingers and you're constantly behind. It's the breathless panic of racing the clock, trying to do more, be more, achieve faster. You move not with purpose, but with pressure, and instead of making intentional choices, you react urgently, anxiously, desperately, because it always feels like time is running out. This trap doesn't just stress you, it distorts your sense of value. You begin to believe that fast means important, that soon means successful, and that later is a failure. You rush decisions, not because they're right, but because they're timely. You say yes to things that drain you because you're afraid the window will close. You stay in motion because stillness feels like falling behind. Even joy becomes a deadline, something to chase, achieve, maximize. And the cruelest part is this: the more you fear wasting time, the more you actually do. You fill your days with noise, urgency, and panic productivity, while the things that truly matter, presence, connection, alignment, get pushed aside for being too slow. You become addicted to pace, to momentum, to feeling productive, even if you're moving in the wrong direction. Time itself isn't the enemy. It's your relationship to it that suffocates you, because when you believe there's never enough, you never feel enough. Every minute is a threat. Every pause is guilt. Every quiet moment is a missed opportunity to optimize. And in trying so hard to outrun the clock, you forget how to exist inside it. Milestone Mirage. The milestone mirage is the seductive illusion that once you reach a certain point in life, get the job, the degree, the house, the relationship, you'll finally feel whole. It's the belief that contentment is waiting just over the next finish line, and that happiness is a reward you unlock by achieving enough. So you chase, you strive, you count down the days to then, but then never arrives the way you expect. You hit the milestone, and for a moment, there's a high, a sense of arrival. You post the picture, celebrate with friends, maybe even cry. But underneath the glitter, something quieter sets in. Is this it? The peace doesn't last. The emptiness leaks back in, and instead of questioning the promise, you blame yourself. You think, I must need more. I must not be doing it right. Maybe the next goal is the one that will fix everything. This trap feeds on future tension. You get addicted to progress, to being in motion. The idea that this moment is good enough becomes unbearable because it would mean you have to face what's here, not just what's ahead. You start measuring your worth by milestones. You confuse visibility with value. You look around and think, if I've achieved this much and still feel hollow, what does that say about me? So you run harder, not toward joy, but away from the fear that nothing outside of you can ever fill the void, because the truth is hard to swallow. Milestones change your circumstances, not your soul. They decorate your life, but they don't define your peace. And until you learn how to sit with yourself between the markers, you'll keep mistaking arrival for arrival, never realizing you've been home the whole time. Optimization, compulsion. Optimization compulsion is the relentless urge to upgrade every part of your life, as if nothing is ever good enough unless it's being optimized. Every habit, every process, every moment must be improved, streamlined, hacked. Even rest becomes a performance. Even joy becomes a project. You don't just want to live, you want to maximize everything you touch. This trap feels productive. It wears the costume of discipline, ambition, self-mastery. You read the books, track the metrics, monitor your habits like a machine chasing perfection. You believe that if you can just find the right system, the right routine, the right tweak, life will finally fall into place. But optimization is a hunger that doesn't end. It's a mirror that only shows you what's missing. You can hit every milestone and still feel behind. You can do everything better and still feel broken. The compulsion becomes a cage. You can't enjoy a walk without thinking about step count. You can't cook without wondering how to save time. You can't relax without judging if it was restorative enough. Everything becomes a means to a better version of itself. And in the process, you forget how to simply be. You forget that not everything sacred must be efficient. Not everything meaningful needs to be measurable. Worse, You start optimizing people. Relationships become schedules to manage. Conversations become opportunities to improve. Even your emotions become problems to fix. You begin to lose the messiness that makes you human, because optimization can't tolerate imperfection. And yet, it is exactly in the imperfect, the inefficient, the unproductive moments that life whispers its deepest truths. Hardship equals meaning trap. The hardship equals meaning trap is the romanticized belief that pain automatically makes something profound, that if you're suffering, it must be for a greater purpose. It's the comforting illusion that struggle alone earns you wisdom, depth, or moral superiority. You start to equate difficulty with value, thinking that anything easy must be empty and anything hard must be sacred. This trap is born in pain that craves justification. When life wounds you, your mind rushes to find meaning in the mess. You whisper, there has to be a reason. You turn your scars into badges, your trauma into identity, and for a while, that narrative helps you survive. You tell yourself you had to go through it to become who you are, but then something shifts, and suffering becomes a story you start clinging to, even when it's no longer serving you. You begin chasing struggle without realizing it. You choose the harder path, not because it's better, but because it feels more real. You distrust ease. You reject peace. You self-sabotage joy because it doesn't look like the kind of life that matters. You form relationships through shared pain, not shared values. You wear burnout as a badge. You start to believe that unless you're hurting, you're not growing. But struggle isn't proof of worth. Pain isn't always a teacher. Some suffering is just suffering. Some hardship leaves no gift, no grand revelation, just grief. And clinging to the idea that every wound must mean something keeps you from healing. It keeps you tethered to the very pain you deserve to outgrow. Meaning isn't in the hardship itself. It's in how you choose to carry it forward or let it go. Action bias. Action bias is the reflexive belief that doing something, anything, is better than waiting, resting, or reflecting. It's the compulsion to move just to avoid stillness. The discomfort of pause feels like failure. The silence feels like falling behind. So you act. You rush into decisions. Substitution. You say yes too quickly. You fix things that aren't broken. You move, not because you're clear, but because you're afraid to sit in the not knowing. This trap rewards itself with the illusion of progress. Busyness looks like productivity. Quick action feels like control. You confuse motion with meaning. You start believing that effort equals effectiveness, that solutions must be immediate, and that hesitation is weakness. The moment uncertainty creeps in, you leap toward a fix, any fix, just to escape the anxiety of stillness. But sometimes clarity only comes in stillness, and when you act without it, you often choose from fear, not wisdom. You overcommit. You take the wrong job, send the regrettable text, make the impulsive purchase, say the words you didn't mean. Then you spend twice as long cleaning up the consequences of decisions made in panic. Action bias makes you allergic to uncertainty. But uncertainty is not the enemy. Rushing blindly through it is. Some of the most powerful moments in life demand pause, waiting, listening, letting discomfort breathe. But this trap tells you stillness is laziness. It tells you to hurry up and figure it out. So, you perform solutions instead of creating them. You act before you're aligned. You chase escape over understanding. And slowly, you forget how to trust the wisdom that only silence can speak. Envy equals failure trap. The envy failure trap is the shame-soaked belief that if you feel envy, it means you failed, that someone else's success is a reflection of your inadequacy. It's the sting in your chest when a friend wins, when a stranger shines, when someone lives a version of the life you secretly want. You don't just feel jealous, you feel defective, like their joy is evidence of your own missing pieces. This trap works by turning a natural emotion into a character flaw. Envy becomes something ugly, something you're not supposed to feel. So instead of listening to it, you bury it. Or worse, you believe it. You let it whisper that you're behind, unworthy, invisible. You scroll through the curated lives of others, and instead of being inspired, you start unraveling. You tell yourself they're ahead, so I must be behind. They have it, so I must have failed. But envy is not a verdict. It's a signal. It's not proof you're broken. It's a mirror showing you what you long for but haven't yet claimed. It doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It doesn't mean you're shallow. It means there's a gap between where you are and where your soul wants to go. And that gap hurts. Not because someone else took your dream, but because you're afraid you never will. Envy becomes dangerous only when it turns inward, when you don't let it speak, when you use it to punish yourself instead of to guide yourself. Because deep down, you don't envy what they have. You envy the permission they gave themselves to go after it. And that permission, it was never theirs alone to hold. Feeling as forecast trap. Feeling as forecast trap is the illusion that how you feel right now is not just real, it's forever. It's the moment despair whispers, this is how life will always feel. When loneliness, fear, apathy, or anxiety show up, they don't just visit, they build futures in your head. You start seeing your entire life through the lens of a single emotional moment, as if today's weather is tomorrow's climate. This trap is cruel because feelings are persuasive. When you're overwhelmed, the future shrinks. When you're hopeless, nothing looks possible. When you're anxious, every path feels unsafe. The brain doesn't just observe emotions, it builds narratives around them. You don't just think I feel stuck, you think I'll never get out of this. You don't just think I feel unloved, you think I'll always be alone. You begin to write your future in the ink of your present emotion. But feelings aren't forecasts, they're waves. They rise, crash, and fade. What feels impossible at 2 a.m. may feel manageable at 10 a.m. What feels unbearable today might not even register next week. But in the moment, your brain forgets that. It believes emotion equals evidence, that heaviness means permanence, that sadness is destiny. And so you spiral, not just because of what you feel, but because of what you think it means. The real danger isn't the feeling, it's the story you attach to it. The certainty that this is your truth now, that this version of you is fixed, that this pain will echo endlessly. But the storm is not the sky. It passes. It always does. Even if you can't see the horizon, it's still there, unchanged, waiting. Overattachment to roles. The overattachment to roles trap is the quiet surrender of your identity to the titles you wear: parent, partner, professional, provider, achiever. It's the slow erosion of your deeper self beneath the weight of who you think you're supposed to be. You stop asking, who am I really? And start answering only with what you do. And when the role thrives, you feel valuable. But when it cracks or ends, you feel like nothing. This trap feels noble. You give yourself fully to a role, believing it gives your life meaning. You pour your energy into your career, your family, your goals. You wear your productivity like armor. You pride yourself on being dependable, driven, selfless. And people applaud you for it. They admire the role, they need the role, but they don't always see the person buried underneath it. Then one day, the job ends. The kids grow up. The applause fades, or the pressure simply becomes unbearable. And in the silence, a terrifying question emerges. If I'm not that anymore, who am I? You realize your self-worth was never rooted in being, only in performing. You never learned how to love yourself without proving yourself. Overattachment to roles creates fragility beneath the surface. Because roles can be taken, they can shift, collapse, or betray you. And if your identity is tied to them, then your entire sense of self collapses with them. You cling tighter, you resist change, you stay in toxic situations because leaving would mean losing the identity you've built your life around. But you are not your roles. You are the presence that fills them, not the labels themselves. The real you exists beneath the expectations, beneath the performance, beneath the names others call you, and that self doesn't need a title to be enough. Present equals permanent trap. The present equals permanent trap is the quiet lie that convinces you this moment, this feeling, this failure, this fog is forever. It's the illusion that how life feels right now is how it will always feel. When you're stuck, it feels like you'll never move again. When you're heartbroken, it feels like you'll never love again. When you're lost, it feels like clarity is a myth reserved for other people. This trap doesn't scream, it whispers. It sinks in slowly, wrapping around your mind until you can't remember a time before the heaviness. Hope fades, not because the future is doomed, but because your current state becomes your only reference point. You forget that you've felt this way before and survived it. You forget that you've been here and you left. But when you're in the middle of it, time bends. The past feels irrelevant. The future feels impossible. And the now becomes everything. The pain of this trap isn't just in the feeling. It's in the forecast. You don't just feel hopeless. You believe you'll always feel hopeless. And so you stop trying. You stop reaching. You stop believing that this moment is just that, a moment. The trap drains your resilience because it steals your memory of movement. It tells you this ache is your new normal, that your anxiety is your personality, that your grief is your forever home. But the truth is, permanence is a myth emotions like to tell when they're at their loudest. You are not frozen. You are in transit. This moment is real, but it's not final. You are not what you feel. You are the one who feels it. And you, unlike this feeling, are still becoming. Rest equals laziness trap. The rest equals laziness trap is the deeply internalized belief that slowing down is failure in disguise, that taking a break means you're falling behind, slacking off, or somehow less worthy. It's the guilt that creeps in when you stop moving, the self-criticism that whispers, you should be doing more, even when your body aches, even when your mind is fraying, even when your soul is begging for stillness. This trap forms in a culture that glorifies burnout and calls it ambition. You're taught that exhaustion is noble, that productivity equals value, that rest must be earned like a luxury instead of honored like a necessity. So even when you pause, you don't really rest. You scroll, distract, half recover, while mentally rehearsing your to-do list. You call it relaxation, but it's just tension with the volume turned down. You start to fear rest, not because it's bad, but because of what it says about you. You feel lazy for listening to your limits. You feel shame for choosing stillness when others are grinding. You convince yourself that if you stop, everything will fall apart, or worse, people will see you as someone who couldn't keep up. You've so thoroughly tied your identity to doing that you've forgotten how to simply be. But rest isn't weakness. It's not a break from the work. It is the work. It's how you recover, repair, and return to yourself. And when you ignore that truth long enough, your body will eventually force the rest you refuse to allow, not out of kindness, but out of survival. Because what you've been calling laziness is often wisdom, a boundary, a signal, a lifeline you were taught to feel ashamed for needing. Speed trap. The speed trap is the belief that the faster you move, decide, respond, or succeed, the more competent and valuable you are. It's the rush to prove your worth in record time, the addiction to being quick, to always being the first to finish, the first to know, the first to win. You start to equate slowness with stupidity, hesitation with weakness, rest with laziness, and so you live your life like it's a race, with no finish line, no breath, and no room to question if you're even headed in the right direction. This trap doesn't always scream urgency. It often whispers pride. You take pride in being efficient, in never pausing, in just knowing the answer, and the world rewards you for it. You're admired for your output, your decisiveness, your hustle, but beneath that speed is often panic, a terror of falling behind, a fear that slowing down means being forgotten, replaced, or exposed as not enough. You stop listening deeply because listening takes time. You avoid deep thinking because pondering looks like stalling. You make fast decisions not because they're wise, but because they're fast. And fast has become your measure of success. Even in moments meant to be slow, grieving, healing, learning, loving, you try to accelerate. You ask, how long will this take? Instead of, what does this need? And the cruel irony is this: in chasing speed, you often lose depth. You make more mistakes. You miss what matters. You move quickly in the wrong direction. But in the trap, none of that registers, because stillness now feels like failure, and slowness, the very thing that cultivates clarity, becomes your enemy. Fix-it mindset trap. The fix-it mindset trap is the compulsive urge to treat every discomfort like a problem that demands a solution right now. The moment sadness, confusion, boredom, or conflict arises, your mind leaps into action. What do I do? How do I fix this? How do I make it stop? You don't sit with the feeling. You scramble to erase it. You treat your emotions like broken machines instead of messages worth listening to. This trap feels responsible, even productive. You think you're being proactive. You pride yourself on being the one who takes control, who solves, who moves forward. But beneath that drive is fear. Fear of stillness, fear of not knowing, fear that if you don't fix the discomfort fast enough, it will consume you or reveal something unbearable. So you patch, you distract, you rationalize, you talk yourself out of feelings instead of through them. You become addicted to answers, even if they're shallow. You cling to strategies, hacks, and checklists, not because they always help, but because they make the pain feel more manageable. But some feelings aren't meant to be managed. Some things hurt because they're supposed to. Some discomfort isn't a malfunction, it's an invitation. This mindset keeps you in motion but out of connection, with yourself, with others, with the truth underneath the ache. You never give your heart time to speak because your mind is too loud, too fast, too eager to make the feeling go away. But not all healing is action. Sometimes it's stillness. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not fix, but feel. Let the moment breathe. Let the ache exist. Let yourself be a human being, not a repair project. Life as Project Trap. The life as Project Trap is the silent transformation of your existence into something to manage, optimize, and complete. You stop living and start strategizing your way through everything. Your goals, your healing, your relationships, even your identity. Life becomes a checklist. You aren't just growing, you're working on yourself. You aren't just resting, you're recharging. Every moment must serve a function. Every choice must have an outcome. This trap masquerades as ambition. It feels responsible, forward-thinking, admirable. You build routines, set milestones, track your progress. But underneath the structure is a quiet fear that who you are right now isn't enough, that your worth only exists in future versions of yourself. So you treat your soul like a startup, your heart like a spreadsheet, and your life becomes a never-ending series of self-improvement campaigns. You can't just be. Stillness feels like waste. Spontaneity feels inefficient. Even your pain must have a plan. You start dissecting every emotion for insight. Every failure must teach you something. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to grow. But in that constant pursuit of becoming better, you lose the ability to belong to yourself now. And worst of all, you never arrive, because a project is never truly finished, just delayed, redesigned, pushed to the next phase. You feel perpetually behind, not because you are, but because the finish line keeps moving. Peace becomes something to earn. Love becomes something to become worthy of. And life, the raw, unpredictable, unoptimized chaos of it, becomes something you're always preparing for, but never actually inhabiting. Identity through others trap. The identity through others trap is the quiet surrender of your sense of self to the eyes watching you. It's the subtle but consuming habit of measuring who you are by how you're perceived, what they think, how they react, whether you're accepted. You learn to build mirrors out of people and then forget who you are without their reflection. This trap often begins in innocence. As children, we survive by reading others, learning what pleases, what earns love, what gets punished. But somewhere along the way, that survival becomes identity. You shape yourself to fit the image others expect. You become the good child, the impressive student, the reliable friend, the likable partner. You craft a version of you that is palatable, polished, safe, and people reward it. But the applause becomes a leash. You stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What would make them proud? What would make them stay?" You abandon parts of yourself too loud, too strange, too wild. You flatten your truth to avoid disapproval. You smile when you're breaking. You say yes when your body screams no. And over time, you begin to disappear, replaced by a version of you built for validation, not authenticity. This trap leaves you fragile, because when approval becomes oxygen, rejection feels like suffocation. A harsh word becomes an identity crisis. A lost relationship feels like erasure. You chase connection not to share yourself, but to find yourself. And that search never ends, because no one else can give you what only you were meant to hold. You are not what they see. You are what remains when no one is watching, when the room is quiet, when there's no one to impress. That self, the unfiltered, inconvenient, unapproved one, is where your freedom lives, but you won't meet them until you stop performing long enough to listen. Should be happy trap. The should be happy trap is the quiet shame that creeps in when life looks good on paper, but happiness doesn't show up to match it. You have the job, the relationship, the milestones. You've done the right things, checked the boxes, smiled for the pictures, but deep inside, something feels flat, unsettled, maybe even empty. And instead of naming it, you judge it. You think, "What's wrong with me? I should be happy." This trap doesn't come from failure. It comes from success that doesn't fulfill, and that's what makes it so suffocating. You don't feel permission to be sad, confused, or lost. You've made it, so why aren't you glowing with gratitude? The world tells you that dissatisfaction in comfort is ungrateful, that sadness in success is weakness. So you hide it, you force smiles, you keep up the performance, and inside, the guilt only grows. This guilt is cruel. It convinces you that your emotions are betrayals, that struggling while surrounded by privilege makes your pain invalid. You gaslight yourself out of feeling. You compare downward. At least I have a job. At least I'm not alone. Others would kill for this, and you believe that pain must be justified by tragedy, not truth. But the heart doesn't work that way. It doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't care how things look, only how they feel. And when you deny what it's telling you, it goes quiet, numb, detached. The trap is thinking you owe the world happiness for your blessings, that good fortune must always equal joy. But joy is not a transaction, it's alignment. And when something inside you aches, even in the presence of good, it doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're waking up. Perfection through planning trap. The perfection through planning trap is the seductive belief that if you think hard enough, prepare long enough, or map every detail perfectly, you can outsmart failure. It's the illusion that with enough foresight, you'll be immune to pain, rejection, or regret. You don't just plan to be ready, you plan to be untouchable. This trap feeds on fear disguised as diligence. You tell yourself you're being responsible, strategic, wise, but beneath the endless spreadsheets, lists, and contingency maps is a terrified part of you that doesn't trust life, and maybe doesn't trust yourself. You believe mistakes are avoidable if only you plan harder, and when something still goes wrong, it doesn't just feel disappointing. It feels like personal failure. I should have seen this coming. I should have known better. You begin to confuse control with safety. Uncertainty becomes the enemy. Spontaneity feels dangerous. You delay action in the name of not being ready yet, but what you're really doing is trying to eliminate all risk. And in the process, you delay living. You watch opportunities pass while you're stuck in preparation mode. You convince yourself that once the plan is perfect, you'll finally begin. But perfection never arrives, because no plan, no matter how meticulous, can prevent life from being messy, unpredictable, human. What you're chasing isn't preparation, it's protection. But you can't logic your way out of being human. You will make mistakes, you will fall, things will break, and not because you planned poorly, but because life isn't something you conquer, it's something you navigate. Plans can guide you, they can support you, but they will never save you from being real. Memory equals reality trap. The memory equals reality trap is the quiet deception of believing your memories are flawless mirrors of the past, accurate, fixed, and trustworthy. It's the conviction that what you remember must be what actually happened because it feels vivid, detailed, emotionally charged. You build your story on those images, make decisions from them, carry guilt, pride, blame, regret. But memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction, and it lies more than you think. This trap is so dangerous because it doesn't feel like a belief, it feels like truth. You remember the argument and the exact words they used. You remember who hurt you, how they looked at you, what they said. You remember what you didn't do, and you carry that shame as fact. But memory is not a camera. It edits, fills in gaps, changes with time, mood, trauma, and bias. It reshapes itself with every recall. And the more you revisit it, the less real it actually becomes. Still, you cling to it. You use it as evidence, as identity. You believe the version of you in those memories is the real you. And when those memories are painful, distorted, or incomplete, they become cages. You punish yourself for things that didn't happen the way you think they did. You hold grudges over details that may never have existed. You define relationships by moments your brain may have altered. You trust the feeling in your chest over the facts you can't quite verify, and the feeling always feels right. But memory is not the past. It is your brain's best attempt at making sense of it. And sometimes it gets it wrong, not because you're lying, but because you're human. What you recall might not be false, but it's rarely whole. And when you mistake memory for objective reality, you stop questioning the stories that may be hurting you more than the truth ever did. Introspection overload. Introspection overload is the belief that every problem, every ache, every stuck moment must be solved by going deeper into yourself. It's the conviction that if you just think hard enough, reflect long enough, or peel back one more layer, the answer will finally appear. You become your own constant excavation site, digging, analyzing, decoding every thought and emotion like a puzzle that must be solved before you're allowed to move. This trap often disguises itself as wisdom. You're not running from yourself. You're running towards self-awareness. You journal, you meditate, you sit with your feelings, but it never ends because the deeper you go, the more complexity you find. You start to believe that not having clarity means you're not healed, that every discomfort is a sign there's more work to do, that stillness isn't peace, it's laziness. And so you keep diving, believing the real breakthrough is just one insight away. But the truth is, some answers don't live inside of you. They live in action, in trying, failing, speaking, connecting. You can't think your way into confidence. You can't overanalyze your way into trust. Some parts of you only wake up when you move, but introspection overload convinces you to wait, to pause until you figure it out, and life passes while you're in your head, rearranging thoughts that don't need rearranging, just releasing. You start mistaking motionless self-analysis for growth, but healing isn't always deeper. Sometimes it's simpler. Sometimes the answer isn't a hidden wound. It's that you've been sitting in the same loop too long, mistaking rumination for revelation. Just world fallacy. The just world fallacy is the comforting but dangerous belief that life is fair by default, that good people are rewarded, bad people are punished, and everything happens for a morally perfect reason. It's the illusion that the world operates like a moral equation. Be kind, work hard, do the right thing, and life will protect you. When something goes wrong, you don't just feel pain, you feel betrayed. This trap begins with the craving for order. It feels terrifying to live in a world where cruelty can win, where innocence can suffer, where hard work doesn't guarantee success. So instead, your mind builds a myth. The world is just, and everything balances out eventually. You tell yourself stories to maintain this belief. That person failed because they didn't try hard enough. That breakup happened because they weren't meant for you. That tragedy must have a hidden purpose. You find comfort in control, even if it's imaginary. But when you become the one hurting, when you love well and lose, when you work hard and still break, when you're kind and still mistreated, the fallacy turns on you. Suddenly, you question your worth. Did I deserve this? Did I attract this? Was I not good enough? Instead of comforting you, the belief starts to crush you. It makes you think suffering equals failure. It turns pain into a punishment. The truth is harder to hold. The world isn't always fair. Good people get hurt. Bad people get away with things. Life is not a vending machine of morality. And yet, there is still goodness, still grace, still meaning. But not because you earned it, because you're human. And sometimes, that's all the reason there is. Knowledge equal mastery trap. The knowledge equal mastery trap is the subtle illusion that understanding something mentally means you've already lived it, practiced it, become it. It's the comforting lie that reading the book, knowing the theory, or talking about the concept is the same as embodying the truth of it. You say, I know this already, and assume that's enough, but there is a vast, aching distance between comprehension and transformation, and this trap hides it from you. It's easy to confuse clarity with change. You read about boundaries and feel empowered, but still say yes when you mean no. You understand emotional regulation, but still lash out or shut down when you're triggered. You grasp the importance of presence, but still scroll through life, distracted. You know better, and then beat yourself up for not doing better, because deep down, you believe knowledge would carry you across the finish line, and when it doesn't, you feel like a fraud. This trap thrives in intelligent minds. You gather insight after insight, stacking wisdom like armor. But it's not armor, it's weight, because when you haven't yet lived what you know, your awareness becomes a mirror that reflects all the ways you still fall short. You say all the right things, offer advice that even you can't follow, and wonder why your life still feels stuck. You assume mastery is near because understanding came easily. But knowing a path is not walking it. Naming a wound is not healing it. Quoting wisdom is not living it. The truth is, mastery is repetition. It's failing forward. It's humbling. And sometimes it looks like knowing the lesson and still forgetting it in real time. Not because you're weak, but because knowledge is the seed. Mastery is the root system that only grows through messy, lived experience. Unhappiness means mistake trap. The unhappiness means mistake trap is the reflexive belief that if something makes you feel bad, it must be wrong. That sadness, doubt, discomfort, or discontent are proof you chose incorrectly. That a job that feels heavy, a relationship that feels complicated, a decision that brought struggle must mean you failed. Because happiness, we're told, is the compass. Follow your bliss. Trust your joy. So when that bliss fades, panic rushes in. Did I mess everything up? This trap is seductive because it promises clarity. If it hurts, don't do it. If it's hard, walk away. But the truth is murkier. Growth hurts. Healing aches. Love stretches you in uncomfortable ways. Becoming someone new often feels like loss, and sometimes doing the right thing, setting a boundary, leaving the familiar, confronting truth feels awful in the moment. Unhappiness isn't always a mistake. Sometimes it's the cost of evolution, but this trap convinces you otherwise. It teaches you to fear emotional turbulence, to pathologize discomfort, to run from pain instead of asking what it's pointing toward. You start to second-guess every low. You distrust your own decisions. You label necessary chapters as failures simply because they didn't feel good. And the most dangerous part is what it robs you of: staying power. Because not every meaningful thing feels good right away. Sometimes discomfort is evidence that you're in motion, leaving behind an old self, stretching towards something real. But when you treat unhappiness like a red flag instead of a message, you abandon paths that were meant to change you. You quit before the beauty arrives. You confuse pain with punishment instead of seeing it as part of the process of becoming. Absolutist language trap. The absolutist language trap is the cognitive reflex of turning pain into absolutes, using words like always, never, everyone, or no one to make your emotions feel certain, justified, unshakable. It's the moment you say, I always screw this up. They never listen to me. Everyone leaves. No one understands. And in that instant, your brain builds a prison out of exaggeration and calls it truth. This trap feels powerful at first. Absolutes give your feelings weight. They sound definitive, undeniable. They turn a bad moment into a sweeping declaration. Not just this hurt me, but this always happens. It's how your mind tries to make sense of pain by zooming out and generalizing it. You mistake intensity for evidence. Emotion becomes reality. But what begins as expression becomes belief. And what you believe, you start to live. You stop challenging the thought. You begin looking for proof of your absolutes and ignoring anything that contradicts them. Your brain develops selective vision. You notice every small rejection, every imperfection, every broken promise, and say, see, I was right, even if you're not, even if you're just hurting. This kind of language turns pain into permanence. You trap yourself in a story that doesn't allow room for nuance, for exceptions, for healing, and worst of all, you start to believe that if something isn't always, it doesn't matter. If someone hasn't never hurt you, their love must not count. You flatten life into extremes and lose the messy, beautiful truth that most things exist in between. The danger isn't just in what these words say, it's in what they silence. They block curiosity. They end conversations. They make your world smaller. And you deserve a world big enough for complexity, for contradictions, for second chances, even with yourself. Secondhand values trap. The secondhand values trap is the quiet life you build from borrowed beliefs, ideas you didn't choose but absorbed. It's the silent agreement you made with voices you don't remember agreeing to. Parents, teachers, culture, religion, society. They handed you a script, and you started reciting it before you knew you had a voice of your own. You call it truth. You call it identity. But deep down, something feels off, like you're living someone else's life. This trap rarely looks like oppression. It looks like tradition, like normalcy, like just the way things are. You chase the job that's respected, not the one that excites you. You stay in a relationship because it looks healthy, not because it feels alive. You judge yourself for not wanting what everyone else seems to want. You force joy where there is none. And when the dissonance shows up, when the anxiety, numbness, or restlessness creeps in, you don't question the values, you question yourself. You think you're broken for not feeling fulfilled. You think your lack of excitement is a lack of gratitude. But the truth is, your life doesn't fit because it wasn't tailored for you. It was passed down, handed over, installed like software, and you've been running it out of loyalty, fear, and habit. This trap steals authenticity. It makes you feel guilty for wanting different. It makes you doubt your instincts because your desires don't match the beliefs you inherited. You confuse rebellion with immorality. You confuse alignment with selfishness, and so you stay silent, you stay small, you stay in line, carving a life out of shoulds, all while wondering why it doesn't feel like yours. Assumption of intent. Assumption of intent is the quiet conviction that you already know why someone did what they did, that their motives, their thoughts, their hidden meanings are obvious, even if they never said a word. It's the instinct to fill in silence with suspicion, to interpret a glance, a delay, a text, or a tone as proof of something deeper. They're ignoring me on purpose. She's trying to make me feel small. He only said that to hurt me. You assign motive like a mind reader, but what you're really doing is protecting yourself from the pain of uncertainty. This trap grows out of fear. The unknown feels dangerous, so your brain rushes to close the gap with certainty, and that certainty often comes from wounds, not facts. If you've been dismissed before, a pause in a conversation becomes rejection. If you've been betrayed, kindness feels suspicious. You stop seeing people for who they are and start seeing them through the lens of who hurt you. And the worst part? It feels true. Emotion colors your logic. Assumptions feel like instincts. You don't question the narrative because it feels like memory, like pattern, like proof. But often, you're not reacting to the person in front of you. You're reacting to the story you've written about them. A story built not on evidence, but on fear, history, and imagination. This trap can destroy connection. It makes curiosity impossible. You stop asking, "What did they mean?" and start declaring, "I know what they meant." You harden, you pull away, you argue against shadows, and sometimes you punish people for things they never intended, never said, never felt, because you never gave them the chance to explain. If only trap. The if only trap is the haunting illusion that happiness, peace, or purpose are just one change away. If only I had more money. If only I were in a relationship. If only I had a different job, lived in a better city, looked a certain way, then life would begin. Then I'd finally feel okay. This trap keeps joy suspended, always dangling just out of reach, always tied to a condition that never seems to arrive, or, when it does, never fully delivers. It seduces you with simplicity. It gives your pain a target, your dissatisfaction a name. You feel stuck, and this trap offers an answer that's both comforting and deceiving. It's just this one thing. But when that one thing changes, when the relationship comes, the promotion happens, the move is made, the ache doesn't vanish. It just shifts. A new if only takes its place, and the chase continues. This trap is dangerous because it delays your life. It puts your presence on hold. You stop looking inward or engaging fully with what is because your gaze is locked on what's missing. You begin to live in the future like it's a promised land, while quietly abandoning the only place anything ever really happens, now. Even your gratitude becomes conditional. Even your self-worth hangs in limbo, waiting for that one external fix to unlock it. And worst of all, the if only becomes identity. You become the person always waiting, always reaching, always almost happy. You mistake longing for momentum, fantasy for purpose, but it's not your circumstances holding joy hostage. It's the belief that joy must be earned by arriving somewhere else. And that place, it keeps moving every time you get close. Fear, a signal of truth trap. The fear, a signal of truth trap, is the powerful illusion that fear is not just a feeling, but a reliable guide. It's the belief that if something scares you deeply, it must mean it's wrong, unsafe, or dangerous. You feel the fear, and instead of questioning it, you crown it as your intuition, as if dread is wisdom and discomfort is prophecy. This trap is persuasive because fear doesn't whisper, it grips. It tightens your chest, accelerates your thoughts, floods your body with urgency. It feels like truth, like a flashing warning sign that demands obedience. So, when fear shows up before a relationship, a risk, a conversation, or a leap, you assume it knows something you don't. You step back. You say no. You call it gut instinct. But sometimes it isn't intuition. It's conditioning. It's trauma. It's the echo of a past wound, not a forecast of the future. Fear is primal. It exists to protect, not to discern. It doesn't check facts. It scans for threat, and it's indiscriminate. It responds to actual danger and imagined failure the same way. The new job that scares you might be exactly what you need. The vulnerable conversation that paralyzes you might be your first step toward real connection. But in the trap, you equate fear with fact. You confuse emotional volume with spiritual truth. And the deeper cost is this: fear becomes your gatekeeper. You start avoiding the very experiences meant to stretch and transform you. You mistake growth for danger, intimacy for risk, opportunity for threat. And slowly, your life becomes smaller, not safer. Because fear isn't always false, but it's not always right. And when you treat it like a compass, you end up walking in circles, forever mistaking the edge of your comfort zone for the edge of your fate. Unfinished unworthy trap. The unfinished unworthy trap is the quiet belief that until something is complete, polished, proven, published, you don't deserve to feel proud, seen, or enough. You measure your value by your output, and your output by its final form. Works in progress don't count. Drafts don't count. Ideas don't count. You don't count until there's a finished product to point to, something external to justify your existence. This trap makes achievement the price of self-worth, not effort, not heart, not courage, completion. If you don't finish the novel, you're not a writer. If you don't launch the business, you're not an entrepreneur. If you haven't fixed everything inside you, you're not healing. You're just behind. So you live in a constant state of not there yet, withholding self-respect until the project, the body, the goal, the transformation is done. But done never comes the way you expect it to. And even when it does, it rarely brings the satisfaction you hoped for, because by then, the trap has already moved the goalposts. You finish one thing, and suddenly it's not enough. You should have done it better, faster, bigger. So you keep pushing, chasing, proving, and the more you delay your own worth, the more hollow your accomplishments feel. You're trying to earn something that was never meant to be earned in the first place. You forget that the messy middle is the miracle, that progress is sacred, that trying is enough. You forget that some of the most beautiful things in life, healing, learning, loving, don't have a finish line. But the trap convinces you that unless it's complete, it's not real, that unless you're done, you're not worthy. And so, even in the midst of becoming, you quietly punish yourself for not having arrived. Avoidance as safety trap. The avoidance as safety trap is the comforting lie that staying away from pain means you're healing from it, that not talking about it, not thinking about it, not facing it means it's gone. You tell yourself you've moved on, that you're over it, that it's in the past, when really it's just been buried, untouched, waiting. Avoidance wears the mask of strength, but underneath, it's just fear dressed up as wisdom. This trap is seductive because it offers relief. The moment you turn away from the thing that hurts, there's silence, peace even, and you mistake that quiet for progress. You avoid the hard conversation and call it boundaries. You numb the grief and call it resilience. You distract yourself with work, pleasure, people, and call it getting back to normal. But the pain doesn't dissolve in the silence. It ferments. It sharpens in the dark. It starts leaking into places it doesn't belong. Your relationships, your reactions, your self-worth. Avoidance doesn't heal the wound. It just delays the bleeding. And while it may protect you from immediate discomfort, it slowly robs you of depth, connection, and self-trust. Because somewhere inside, you know what you're not facing. You feel it in the tension in your body, the patterns you can't break, the hollow victories. The more you avoid it, the more it owns you. You can't outpace pain that's asking to be heard. You can only choose whether to carry it blindly or face it on your own terms. True healing isn't neat, it's raw. It asks you to return to what you'd rather forget and meet it with presence, not denial. Avoidance may feel like safety, but it's a cage, one where nothing can hurt you, but nothing can fully reach you either. Mental story overload. Mental story overload is the unconscious habit of letting your inner narrative take the lead, unchallenged, unfiltered, and often unchecked by reality. It's the voice in your head that spins every silence into rejection, every failure into identity, every unknown into doom. You don't just experience life, you constantly explain it to yourself. And over time, those explanations become law. They must be mad at me. I always screw things up. This means I'm not enough. It doesn't matter if they're true. If the story feels familiar, it becomes fact. This trap is powerful because stories give structure. They turn chaos into clarity, pain into purpose. They let your brain fill in the blanks when reality feels uncertain. But that comfort comes at a cost, because the mind doesn't just tell stories to soothe you. It tells stories to protect you, control you, contain you. And those stories often come from old wounds, not current truths. You start to see the world through old scripts. You stop listening deeply because you've already written the ending. You sabotage moments of joy because your story says they don't last. You dismiss new chances because the narrative says you always fail. And worst of all, you don't realize you're doing it. The stories become so constant, so convincing, that you forget to question them. You mistake narration for truth, emotion for evidence, repetition for reality. But stories are not facts. They're interpretations. And when left unexamined, they become cages. You keep reliving the same patterns, not because life won't change, but because your story won't let it. You're not trapped by circumstance. You're trapped by the tale you're telling yourself about what your life means. Busy equals productive trap. The busy equals productive trap is the illusion that constant motion equals meaningful progress. It's the compulsion to fill your days, your hours, your minutes, believing that being occupied means being valuable. You answer emails at midnight, juggle tasks with no breath between them, check things off lists like they're lifelines, and all the while, you convince yourself, I'm doing something important. I must be moving forward. But deep down, a quiet truth hums. I'm just afraid of stopping, because stillness is where the questions live, the ones you've been too busy to ask, like, am I doing what actually matters? Do I even like the life I'm building? But those questions are heavy, and silence can be terrifying. So you keep moving. You stay busy, not because you're aligned, but because you're afraid of what might surface if you pause. This trap is praised by the world. You're called driven, reliable, ambitious. You're rewarded for your exhaustion, admired for your hustle. No one questions if your work has soul, only if it has speed. But inside, you feel it. That subtle emptiness, that ache at the end of the day when you realize you were busy every minute and yet nothing really moved. Not your joy, not your truth, not your life in the direction that feels like home. Busyness is not a badge, it's often a blindfold. You can fill a day with tasks and still feel empty. You can be in motion for years and never once be in purpose. And the more you equate movement with meaning, the more you lose sight of what truly matters. Because doing more doesn't always mean you're becoming more. It might just mean you're running harder in the wrong direction. Control illusion. The control illusion is the deeply rooted belief that if you plan well enough, work hard enough, worry long enough, or anticipate every outcome, you can prevent pain, avoid chaos, and shape life exactly how you want it. It's the false promise that control equals safety, and that losing control means losing yourself. You micromanage your future. You rehearse conversations before they happen. You brace for disasters that haven't arrived, because somewhere deep down, you believe that control isn't just helpful, it's required to survive. This trap feels like responsibility, like diligence, like strength, but it's driven by fear, fear of the unknown, fear of disappointment, fear of being vulnerable to forces you can't predict. So you grip tighter, you overplan, you overthink, you try to outsmart reality, and when things go off script, as they always do, you blame yourself. You think, I should have seen this coming, I should have done more. You confuse the randomness of life with the failure of your effort. The truth is, control is addictive because it offers the illusion of power without the burden of surrender. But it's an illusion. No matter how careful you are, people leave, plans collapse, emotions overwhelm, life breaks the rules. And when you've built your identity around control, those moments feel like personal annihilation. You don't just lose a plan, you lose your sense of self. And yet, the more you chase control, the more anxious and brittle you become, because deep down, you know it's unsustainable. You weren't made to predict everything. You were made to respond to it, to be adaptive, not omniscient. But this trap tells you that softness is weakness, that trust is dangerous, that surrender means failure, and so you live in constant tension, gripping a world that was never yours to hold. Instant insight trap. The instant insight trap is the craving for sudden clarity, dramatic revelations, and life-altering aha moments that fix everything at once. It's the belief that transformation should arrive like lightning, loud, immediate, unmistakable. You chase breakthroughs, expecting them to split you open and put the pieces back together. You want epiphany, not evolution. You want the flash, not the slow burn. This trap is seductive because it feels like awakening. You read something powerful, sit through a hard conversation, feel a surge of understanding, and expect change to come with it, instantly. But insight isn't transformation. Knowing the truth isn't the same as living it. Real change happens in the messy middle, the boring days, the quiet choices. It unfolds, not explodes. But when the insight fades and life still feels heavy, you wonder what went wrong. You blame yourself. You go searching for the next breakthrough, the next podcast, the next moment of clarity that will finally set you free. But healing doesn't work on demand. Growth is not a switch. It's a practice. A truth can shake you awake, but it won't carry you through the hard mornings. Understanding your patterns doesn't mean they won't repeat. Forgiveness doesn't mean the pain disappears overnight. The trap convinces you that real growth should feel big, that it should happen all at once. And if it doesn't, you must be doing something wrong. So you keep chasing insight like it's the answer. But what actually changes you is the repetition, the showing up, the 1,000 quiet choices you make after the flash of clarity fades. Insight is the spark. Growth is the fire you have to keep feeding. Personality fixation trap. The personality fixation trap is the quiet conviction that who you are is fixed, that your personality is a finished product, a permanent identity you're stuck with. You say things like, I'm just not a people person, or I've always been this way, or I could never do that, as if your traits were carved in stone rather than shaped by experience, fear, and time. It feels like self-awareness, but it's often self-limitation dressed up as truth. This trap forms early. You're praised for being the responsible one, the quiet one, the funny one. You build a self around labels, roles, reactions, until those descriptions stop being reflections and start becoming definitions. You attach to them, you defend them, and when life offers you chances to be someone else, to stretch beyond the edges, you shrink back and say, that's just not me. But what if it could be? What if personality isn't destiny, but habit? What if the things you avoid aren't who you are, but who you've learned to be? The trap convinces you that discomfort equals inauthenticity, that trying new behaviors means pretending. But growth often feels unnatural before it becomes second nature. And identity isn't a cage, it's a canvas. But when you fixate on personality, you stop evolving. You decline invitations life gives you to be bold, soft, wild, still, because your self-story says you're not that type. You start mistaking predictability for integrity, and you quietly abandon the version of you that's waiting just on the other side of your certainty, not because you can't change, but because the trap told you that you never would. Overattribution bias. Overattribution bias is the mental shortcut that assigns too much responsibility to a single person, usually yourself or someone else, for something far more complex. When things go wrong, you zoom in on one cause. It's all my fault. They ruined everything. If only I had done this. You reduce a storm of circumstances into a single target because naming a villain, especially yourself, feels more manageable than accepting chaos. This trap offers false clarity. Complexity is uncomfortable. It's messy, unpredictable, full of gray areas. But blame is clean. It gives you something to hold on to when you feel powerless. So instead of facing the web of factors that shaped an outcome, timing, context, communication gaps, unmet needs, other people's histories, you simplify. And that simplicity becomes a story. You either make yourself the scapegoat or crown someone else the monster. When you blame yourself, it feels like control. If it's all your fault, then maybe you can fix it. But what you're really doing is carrying weight that was never yours to hold. You punish yourself for things shaped by forces far beyond your reach. And when you blame others, you freeze your healing. You anchor your peace to someone else's behavior, waiting for apology, for change, for closure they may never give. Both directions lead to stagnation. Overattribution steals your ability to see reality with compassion. It distorts memory, exaggerates guilt, hardens resentment. It keeps you stuck in regret or rage when what you really need is grace for yourself, for others, for the messy, uncleanable truth that most things don't have one cause or one solution. It wasn't all you. It wasn't all them. It was life unfolding in its unpredictable, painful, human way. Inspiration Dependency Trap. The inspiration dependency trap is the quiet, romantic lie that you must feel ready before you begin. That action should be sparked by a lightning bolt of passion, creativity, or clarity. That if the mood isn't right, if motivation hasn't arrived, if the stars haven't aligned, then it's not time. So you wait, you stall, you scroll through other people's momentum, hoping yours will ignite. But the truth is, inspiration rarely comes first. It's not a prerequisite, it's a byproduct. This trap feels noble. It feels like honoring your inner truth. You say, I'm just not feeling it yet, or I'm waiting for the right moment, and convince yourself that delay is alignment. But deep down, it's fear in disguise. Fear of starting messy, fear of being mediocre, fear that your effort won't match your vision. So instead of facing the discomfort of imperfect action, you wait for a feeling that doesn't come. Or if it does, it doesn't last. Because inspiration is fleeting. It visits without warning, and it leaves just as fast. If you rely on it to act, you'll build a life of half-finished dreams and unopened doors. You'll mistake emotion for permission, and you'll quietly resent yourself for being someone who always wants but rarely moves. The truth is, movement creates momentum. Clarity comes through doing, not waiting. The muse doesn't show up to those who sit still. It shows up to those who show up anyway. The act of beginning, even uninspired, even unsure, is what awakens the part of you that remembers why you wanted this in the first place. But the trap convinces you to wait for magic, not knowing that the magic was always you. You just had to begin. I am my thoughts trap. The I am my thoughts trap is the unconscious fusion of your identity with the endless stream of thoughts in your mind. A cruel idea enters. I'm a failure. No one really cares. I'll never change. And instead of recognizing it as a passing mental event, you become it. You don't just think you're unworthy, you are. The thought isn't just noise. It becomes your truth, your mirror, your name. This trap feels natural because thoughts have volume. They speak in your voice. they sound convincing, especially when they echo what you feared for years, so you stop questioning them. You assume that if your mind said it, it must be true, that every judgment, every anxiety spiral, every self-criticism is a reflection of who you actually are. You live at the mercy of whatever your brain decides to shout that day. And when your thoughts are cruel, so are you to yourself. When they're panicked, you feel broken. When they're hopeless, you forget every reason you ever had to believe in yourself. This trap steals your freedom. It turns your mind into a courtroom, your self-worth into a verdict delivered moment by the loudest, darkest thought. You try to change your life while dragging the full weight of your mental chatter behind you, believing it's not just noise but proof. But thoughts are not commands. They're not truths. They're passing weather in the mind, conditioned by trauma, mood, hormones, habits, even what you ate. You are the sky, not the storm. But the trap wants you to forget that. It wants you to forget that not every thought is yours to believe, only yours to notice and let pass. Vulnerability aversion. Vulnerability. Aversion is the deep-seated belief that being open, honest, exposed, emotionally real is dangerous. That if you let people see the raw, unguarded parts of you, you'll lose their respect, their love, their trust. So you stay armored. You smile when you're aching. You say, "I'm fine," when you're unraveling. You tell the edited story, the safe version, because somewhere along the way, you learn that strength means silence and survival means never letting them see you bleed. This trap is subtle but suffocating. It doesn't always look like fear. It often looks like pride, composure, independence. You convince yourself that you're just private, just strong, just handling it on your own. But underneath is a fragile truth. You're terrified of being misunderstood, rejected, or seen as too much. You think if people really knew you, your doubts, your sadness, your needs, they'd pull away. So you keep your mask on. And the irony is that mask is what keeps connection out. Because vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the foundation of intimacy. It's the bridge between loneliness and love. But when you avoid it, you build walls instead of relationships. You become admired, maybe even envied, but not truly known. You attract people to your performance, not your person. And slowly, painfully, you begin to feel invisible inside your own life. You crave closeness, but sabotage it. You want understanding, but make yourself unknowable. You long to be seen, but only through armor. And this trap is cruelest because it tells you you're protecting yourself, when in reality, you're just starving slowly, not of food, but of connection, of relief, of being met in your mess. The very thing you fear, being open, is the only thing that could ever set you free. But the trap tells you, not yet, not here, not ever. So you stay guarded and call it strength, while your heart quietly waits for permission to come home. Minimalism as morality trap. The minimalism as morality trap is the quiet conviction that owning less, needing less, wanting less makes you better, morally, spiritually, even intellectually. It's the belief that simplicity isn't just a choice, it's a virtue, that restraint equals enlightenment, that detachment equals superiority. You don't just declutter your space, you start to declutter your humanity. This trap often begins with relief. You strip away the excess and feel lighter. You find peace in less noise, less stuff, fewer distractions. But then something shifts. You start to associate consumption with corruption. You begin to judge your desires. Why do I want that? Am I being shallow? Am I not disciplined enough? You confuse your longing for weakness. You start to see value in self-denial rather than self-connection. It's a seductive morality because the world is drowning in excess, and pulling away feels noble. But minimalism becomes a trap when it turns into performance, when the act of having less becomes a measurement of your worth. You start to wear emptiness like a badge. You feel shame over wanting comfort, beauty, softness. You look down on others for chasing what you've decided to renounce. And somewhere along the way, your minimalism stops being about peace and starts being about control. You begin to believe that needing less means being less attached, less emotional, less messy. But your humanity doesn't live in what you own or avoid. It lives in what you feel. And when you use minimalism to suppress desire, you don't become purer, you become muted, because you weren't meant to be defined by what you resist. You were meant to be shaped by what you love. Authenticity, obsession trap. The authenticity obsession trap is the exhausting belief that everything you say, do, choose, or feel must be perfectly aligned with some pure, unshakable version of your real self. You scrutinize every instinct. Is this truly me? Am I being authentic right now? Does this choice reflect the deepest truth of who I am? And in trying so hard to be real, you become frozen, unable to act, speak, or decide without doubting whether it's coming from the right place. This trap feels noble. You're not chasing approval, you're chasing integrity. You're not trying to impress, you're trying to be honest. But the fear beneath it is paralyzing, that if you misstep, if you say something that doesn't match your ideal self, or try something that feels off-brand, you'll be a fraud. So instead of experimenting, you overthink. Instead of evolving, you obsess. And instead of living, you edit. You forget that authenticity isn't a performance, it's a process. It's not a rigid standard, it's a moving target. Who you are today is not who you were last year. What feels true now may shift tomorrow. But this trap convinces you that real must be constant, consistent, unquestionable. So you stop growing in the name of staying genuine. You second-guess joy because it came too easily. You hold back from change because you fear it means you weren't authentic before. And the greatest irony, the pursuit of perfect authenticity becomes the most inauthentic thing of all. You trade spontaneity for scrutiny, aliveness for alignment. You build a cage out of self-awareness and call it freedom. But realness was never about purity. It was about presence, about showing up anyway, even when you're unsure, inconsistent, and still figuring it out. Authenticity doesn't mean never shifting. It means being honest about where you are, even as it changes. Belief equals reality trap. The belief equals reality trap is the unconscious assumption that the way you see the world is the way the world is, that your belief system, shaped by your culture, upbringing, trauma, triumphs, is not just yours, but somehow objective. You don't just believe something, you live as though it's an unspoken law. You filter every moment through your lens and forget it's a lens at all. This trap feels like certainty. You believe in hard work, so you see laziness everywhere. You believe people can't be trusted, so you find betrayal in silence. You believe you're unworthy, so every compliment feels fake, every kindness suspicious. You don't even realize you're interpreting. You think you're observing. You think you're just being realistic, when in fact you're recreating your reality in the image of your beliefs. It's not that beliefs are bad, they're necessary, but when left unexamined, they become invisible cages. They tell you what's possible, who you are, who others can be. And when life offers something outside of those boundaries, something softer, freer, more expansive, you reject it. Not because it's wrong, but because it doesn't fit your map. You start defending your worldview even when it hurts you. You cling to beliefs that keep you small because they feel familiar, safe, true. But beliefs are not truths. They are inherited guesses, shaped by pain, memory, and meaning. They are stories you were told or told yourself, often long before you had the power to question them. And when you confuse them with reality, you stop seeing what's in front of you. You only see what you've already decided is there. So the world stays small, not because it is, but because your belief system won't let it be anything else. Stuckness Assumption. The stuckness assumption is the heavy, convincing belief that you're trapped, Not because there are no options, but because you can't see them. It's the sensation of being frozen in place, watching your life loop in familiar patterns, thinking, this is it. There's no way out, no other path, no choice left that doesn't cost too much. But what feels like entrapment is often blindness. You're not stuck in reality, you're stuck in a limited story about it. This trap forms in silence, in disappointment, in long seasons of trying without seeing results. Slowly, your mind begins to close in, tightening around what's familiar, what's safe, what's already known. You stop exploring, you stop imagining, you stop asking, what else could be true? Because it hurts too much to hope when you've been hurt before. So you settle, not because you're incapable, but because you're convinced there's nothing else to reach for. And this is what makes the trap so dangerous. It hides your agency. You begin to equate lack of clarity with lack of power. You tell yourself that if there were options, you'd see them, that if something better existed, it would have happened by now. So you stop looking, you stop trying. You call resignation realism. You call exhaustion maturity. And you quietly accept a life that doesn't feel like yours, not because it has to be this way, but because you've forgotten what's possible beyond your current lens. But stuck doesn't mean hopeless. It means disconnected from perspective. The walls around you aren't always real. They're built from repetition, fear, and fog. And when you believe you've exhausted all paths, sometimes the next step isn't to fight harder. It's to see differently, because options don't always shout. Sometimes they whisper, and they only get louder when you stop assuming they're not there. Fear of change as truth trap. The fear of change as truth trap is the deeply convincing lie that fear means stop, that the tightness in your chest, the doubt in your gut, the sudden urge to turn back is a warning, not a wound. You feel resistance, and instead of seeing it as part of growth, you treat it as a sign that something is wrong. You don't ask, is this fear because it's wrong? You assume it is because it hurts. This trap confuses discomfort with danger. Change feels shaky, uncertain, unfamiliar, so your nervous system sounds the alarm. Your body tenses, your mind starts whispering, you're making a mistake. You scan for evidence to confirm the feeling, the friend who doesn't understand, the awkward moment, the lack of instant results. And the more afraid you feel, the more convinced you become that you're going the wrong way. But fear doesn't always mean no. Sometimes it means new, and anything new, healing, intimacy, ambition, authenticity, will feel terrifying if all you've ever known is survival. The trap lies in the belief that fear equals truth, when often fear is just habit, a familiar echo from a time when change really was dangerous, when standing out meant rejection, when speaking up meant punishment, when risk meant loss. Now, even when your soul is pulling you forward, your body flinches backward, and you trust the flinch more than the longing. You walk away from opportunities that were meant to free you. You mistake internal resistance for divine redirection. You confuse the pain of growth with the punishment of misalignment. But fear isn't always your intuition. Sometimes it's your history. Sometimes it's the ghost of an old you begging you to stay in the cage just a little longer, because the cage, at least, is predictable. And the trap wins every time you mistake safety for truth and comfort for wisdom. Future Fantasy Trap. The future fantasy trap is the seductive belief that your real life hasn't started yet, that everything will make sense, feel better, and finally begin once you reach some imagined future state. You live in the almost, the not yet, the just wait until, when I lose the weight, when I find the person, when I make the money, when I'm healed, that's when I'll feel whole. That's when life will click. That's when I'll be free to breathe. But that when never arrives the way you think it will, because the future you're chasing isn't real. It's a fantasy. It's not a timeline. It's an emotional promise, a version of you who's finally enough, finally unburdened, finally untouched by doubt. So you live in rehearsal. You keep your joy on layaway. You treat the present as a waiting room, not a life. Days pass, not with presence, but with pressure, to become the person your fantasy demands. And the cruel twist, even when you do reach those milestones, the emptiness lingers. You hit the goal and feel nothing. You get the thing and still feel not there. Because the fantasy was never about the outcome. It was about escape. Escape from the discomfort of now. From the messiness, the unfinishedness, the inconvenient truth that being human never actually feels complete. This trap convinces you that fulfillment is always later. It makes you addicted to arrival while disowning the journey. But life doesn't happen in some distant version of you. It's happening right here, in the imperfect, mundane, unpolished present. And the more you chase the fantasy, the more you miss the only moment you've ever truly had. This one. Toxic Positivity Trap. The toxic positivity trap is the pressure to stay cheerful, grateful, and upbeat, no matter what. It's the belief that negative emotions are flaws to fix, that pain is weakness, and that being positive is not just encouraged, but expected. You tell yourself, look on the bright side, others have it worse. Everything happens for a reason. You mean well, you want peace, but instead of healing, you end up burying. This trap isn't just external, it becomes internalized. You smile while you're breaking. You say, I'm fine, when you're drowning. You force silver linings over heartbreak like it's a race to prove how emotionally evolved you are. But underneath that surface shine is a truth that never got to speak. Sadness that was never held. Anger that was never validated. You start to feel guilty just for feeling human. You wonder, what's wrong with me that I can't just be happy? And that's where this trap cuts deepest. It turns natural, necessary emotions into shame. It teaches you that darkness must be avoided, not explored. That pain is a personal failure instead of part of the process. You don't get to grieve. You don't get to rage. You just keep forcing a glow that dims you from the inside out. Worse, it creates distance in your relationships. People stop telling you the truth because they know you'll rush to fix it with a quote, a mantra, a positive spin. And deep down, you become afraid of your own depth, afraid that if you let the sadness speak, it will never stop. But unspoken pain doesn't vanish. It festers. Positivity isn't healing when it's used as armor. It's just another way to hide. And in the name of being strong, you abandon the softness that would have actually set you free. Martyr Mindset Trap. The martyr mindset trap is the deeply ingrained belief that your suffering is a form of virtue, that the more you sacrifice, the more you struggle, the more you silently endure, the more worthy, noble, or morally superior you become. Pain becomes identity, exhaustion becomes pride, and self-neglect is mistaken for selflessness. You wear your burnout like a badge. You confuse your silence for strength. You begin to believe that the more you give up, the more good you are. This trap is often rooted in love, in loyalty, in the aching desire to be enough for others, for causes, for some invisible standard of what it means to be good. You overextend, overcare, overfunction. You stay when you should leave. You give when you're empty. And all the while, you tell yourself, this is what integrity looks like. That joy is selfish. That rest is weakness. That putting yourself first is betrayal. But beneath the surface, this mindset is fueled by fear. Fear of being unloved if you stop proving your worth. Fear of being seen as selfish if you say no. Fear that if you are not useful, you are not wanted. So you pour yourself out, hoping someone will notice, will validate it, will finally say, you've done enough, but no one does, and deep down, you resent them for it. The martyr mindset doesn't lead to closeness. It leads to quiet bitterness. It's a slow erosion of self, disguised as devotion. And the cruelest part is this. It teaches you that the more you disappear, the more valuable you become. But disappearing doesn't make you good. It makes you gone. and your worth was never meant to be measured by how much of yourself you're willing to lose. Hyper-awareness, the hyper-awareness trap, is the belief that the more you notice, observe, analyze, and track your thoughts, your behaviors, your environment, the more clarity you'll gain. It feels like self-mastery. You're constantly tuned in, scanning your reactions, questioning your motives, decoding every look, tone, and tension in the air. You don't just notice the moment, you dissect it. But awareness without integration doesn't lead to peace. It leads to paralysis. This trap feels like intelligence. You feel sharp, perceptive, even evolved. You catch what others miss. But over time, your heightened attention turns inward like a weapon. You obsess over every shift in mood. You analyze every social exchange on repeat. You spiral in meta-thoughts. Why am I thinking this? What does this mean about me? What am I not seeing? You call it insight, but often it's anxiety in disguise. And the cruel irony is, the more you try to understand everything, the less you actually experience it. You become so consumed with interpreting life that you stop living it. Emotions become problems to solve, not truths to feel. Relationships become puzzles, not connections. You over-monitor your mind like a control tower, trying to prevent disaster, convinced that if you can just stay aware enough, nothing will go wrong. But awareness without trust is exhausting. Knowing what's happening isn't the same as knowing what to do with it. And the mind, when left unchecked, will turn even the most peaceful moment into a problem if it thinks vigilance is the only way to stay safe. Hyper-awareness doesn't make you wise. It makes you weary. It promises control, but often steals your ability to surrender, to feel, and to just be. Not enough yet trap. The not enough yet trap is the relentless feeling that no matter how much you grow, heal, achieve, or change, it's never quite sufficient. There's always more work to do, more to fix, more to prove. You keep chasing a version of yourself that is finally worthy, finally whole, finally done. But the finish line keeps moving. You never get to arrive. You're always almost there, but never enough. This trap disguises itself as ambition, as humility, as self-awareness. You tell yourself, I'm just being honest, or I don't want to get complacent. But beneath it is a quiet, gnawing shame, the belief that something about you is fundamentally lacking, that your current self is a draft, a trial run, a work in progress, not worthy of rest or recognition. You celebrate yourself for a moment, then immediately shift to what's still missing. Progress becomes a guilt-fueled performance. Growth becomes a punishment disguised as purpose, and it's exhausting, because no matter how far you come, your inner critic rewrites the metric. Lost 10 pounds? You should have lost 15. Healed a wound? Why do you still get triggered? Set a boundary? Why did your voice shake? You measure your worth by your gaps, not your gains. And even when others see your light, you see your shadow. But the real tragedy is this: in constantly chasing the better version of you, you abandon the one who's here now, trying, learning, still standing. You forget that growth isn't about arrival, it's about allowing. And your value was never tied to how finished you are, because maybe not enough yet was never the truth, just the echo of an old voice that never learned how to say, you already are. Guilt as guide trap. The guilt as guide trap is the quiet, corrosive habit of mistaking guilt for wisdom, letting it shape your choices, dictate your boundaries, and define your worth. It's the belief that if something makes you feel bad, you must be doing something wrong. You cancel plans because you don't want to disappoint. You say yes when you mean no, just to avoid the hollow ache in your chest. You sacrifice peace, rest, authenticity, not because it's aligned, but because guilt told you that good people don't let others down. This trap feels like morality, like conscience, like compassion, but guilt isn't the same as truth. Guilt is a reaction, not a compass. It can be triggered by old conditioning, by people-pleasing reflexes, by internalized stories about what you owe the world in order to be lovable or worthy. And when you let guilt lead, you end up betraying yourself in the name of being kind. You stop trusting your no. You apologize for things that weren't wrong. You give more than you have. You confuse discomfort with wrongdoing and compassion with self-erasure. You mistake being agreeable for being good and then feel invisible, resentful, quietly angry at a world you never really gave permission to see the real you. The most dangerous part? The more you obey guilt, the louder it gets, because guilt doesn't shrink with compliance. It grows. It feeds on avoidance, not integrity. You can live your entire life serving its demands and still feel like you're not doing enough. But values, real values, don't feel like shame. They feel like alignment, like peace, even when they're hard to follow. Guilt will push you to please, but values, they'll teach you how to live with a clean heart, even if others don't understand. Deservingness Trap. The deservingness trap is the deeply wired belief that life is fair, that if you're good enough, kind enough, hardworking enough, you'll get what you deserve. That pain only comes to those who earn it, and joy is a reward you must qualify for. You treat life like a moral equation. If I suffer enough, love will come. If I do everything right, I'll be chosen. If I stay loyal, I'll be kept. And when reality breaks that equation, you're left not just hurting, but confused, betrayed, ashamed. This trap feels righteous. It gives you a sense of control in an unpredictable world. You tell yourself there's order, that goodness guarantees protection, that effort ensures results. But life doesn't operate on merit. It moves through chaos, timing, accident, and mystery. People cheat and win. People give their hearts and still get left. People break rules and still get love. And that truth burns, especially when you've built your identity around earning what you want. When something beautiful happens, you feel you must have done something right. When it's taken away, you question what you did wrong. You internalize loss as failure. You see suffering as punishment. And worst of all, you begin to resent your own softness. You harden, not because you're cold, but because you're tired of being good with no return. The trap convinces you that if you didn't receive the outcome, you must not have deserved it. But life isn't a vending machine. It doesn't dispense joy in exchange for perfection. Your worth isn't transactional, and the love, peace, or success you crave isn't withheld because you didn't earn it. It's just not always tied to fairness. Sometimes pain happens without cause. Sometimes beauty arrives without logic, and none of it says anything about what you're worth. Reputation Reliance Trap. The reputation reliance trap is the quiet surrender of your identity to the perceptions of others. It's the belief that who you are is only real, only valid, only worthy if it's seen, approved, and reflected back by the outside world. You become the version of yourself that gets applause. You edit your truth to stay likable. You measure your value by reactions, by compliments, likes, silence, or disapproval. And slowly, without noticing, your inner world starts orbiting around the imagined gaze of everyone but you. This trap feels like safety, like success. You tell yourself you're just being intentional, socially aware, building a good reputation, but really, you're outsourcing your self-worth. You hesitate to be messy, to change your mind, to grow in public, because you fear people will notice and revise their opinion of you. You stay stuck in old roles, old versions of yourself, because someone once admired them, and the moment you feel misunderstood, you spiral, not because you lost connection to yourself, but because you lost control of how you're seen. You begin to over-explain, overperform, overcompensate. You mistake perception management for purpose. You chase approval like oxygen, and the more people like you, the more trapped you feel, because now you're responsible for maintaining the image they've accepted. Authenticity becomes a risk. Vulnerability becomes a threat, and your true self waits silently behind the performance, wondering if it will ever be allowed to come forward. But you were never meant to be a mirror. You were never meant to be legible to everyone. The price of reputation should never be self-abandonment, because being seen is hollow when the version of you they love isn't the one that's real. Motivation myth. The motivation myth is the deeply ingrained belief that you must feel ready, energized, or inspired before you can begin. That action should be fueled by excitement, that discipline depends on passion, and that if the fire isn't there, it's not the right time. So you wait for clarity, for confidence, for that rush of motivation to finally kick in and carry you forward, but it rarely does. And while you wait, your life quietly stalls. This trap is comforting because it lets you delay without guilt. You tell yourself you're not lazy, you're just not there yet. You romanticize the future moment where motivation will show up, sweeping you into effortless momentum. But motivation is fickle, it's unreliable, it's an emotional visitor, not a foundation. And the hard truth is this: most of the things that change your life won't feel good at the start. They'll feel boring, awkward, vulnerable, inconvenient. And waiting to feel motivated is just another form of avoidance. The myth convinces you that struggle means misalignment, that if it feels hard, you must not be on the right path. But action creates clarity, not the other way around. Movement generates energy. Discipline builds confidence. You don't act because you're inspired, you act, and then inspiration sometimes arrives. But this trap reverses the order and tells you to stay still until you feel like it. And in that stillness, you begin to believe your lack of drive means something's wrong with you, that you're unmotivated, undisciplined, broken. You're not. You're just human. And humans rarely feel like doing hard things, but we do them anyway, not because we're always motivated, but because we've learned the secret. Motion leads, emotion follows. Waiting for permission trap. The waiting for permission trap is the invisible leash that keeps your dreams, ideas, and voice on pause. While you wait for someone to nod, validate, endorse, or say, yes, you're allowed, you feel the pull to start, to speak, to create, to change, but you hesitate. Not because you don't want it, but because some part of you still believes you need to be granted the right to move forward. You wait for a sign, for readiness, for reassurance, for someone to call you qualified. This trap is subtle and deeply conditioned. From an early age, you're taught to raise your hand, wait your turn, earn your place. Authority isn't just external, it becomes internalized. You start believing that boldness is dangerous, that initiative is arrogance, that claiming space is something only certain people get to do. So even when the idea burns in your chest, you wait. Even when your soul knows what it wants, you ask for permission it will never receive. And the longer you wait, the heavier it gets. Opportunities pass, momentum fades, the window stays open, but you don't walk through, because the only door you're watching is one someone else has to open. You shrink your voice, soften your dreams, delay your power, not because you don't have it, but because the trap convinced you it must be given to you. But no one is coming to crown you ready. No one is arriving to say, now you're allowed. That voice you're waiting for, it was always supposed to be yours. Trauma as identity trap. The trauma as identity trap is the quiet, aching belief that what broke you is you, that the pain you've endured, the betrayal you survived, the loss that gutted you, those moments didn't just happen to you, they became you. You start to speak in scar language. I'm the girl who was cheated on. I'm the one who grew up abandoned. I'm the anxious one, the damaged one, the one who never felt safe. And slowly, the hurt becomes more than history. It becomes home. This trap is not about weakness. It's about survival. Naming your trauma gives it shape. Owning your wounds makes you feel seen. But what begins as empowerment can quietly become entrapment. You stop evolving because you fuse with the version of you that was broken. You confuse healing with forgetting, so you refuse to loosen your grip. because if you're not your trauma, then who are you? The world even rewards it. You get attention, community, a sense of belonging through shared pain. You build identity around endurance, around what you've survived, and there's truth in that, but also danger, because healing eventually asks you to let go of the narrative, not to deny it, but to move beyond it. And that feels like death, like losing a part of yourself you spent years trying to understand. But you are not the worst thing that ever happened to you. You are not the story of your suffering. You are not just the product of what hurt you. You are also what rose from it. What you lost is real, but it is not all you are. And every moment you stay inside the pain, not out of grief, but out of identity, you silently tell the world, this is the only version of me that exists, when in truth, you've only just begun. Past defines you trap. The past defines you trap is the quiet, heavy belief that what's behind you limits what's ahead, that your mistakes, heartbreaks, failures, or traumas have already written your story, and there's nothing left to do but play your part. You start to see yourself not as someone becoming, but as someone bound. You say, that's just who I am. I've always been like this. I've already messed it up. And in doing so, you let old versions of you make decisions for the person you're still becoming. This trap doesn't always sound dramatic. It often feels rational. You base your future on patterns, data, proof. You call it being realistic. You use history as a forecast. I've failed before, so I'll probably fail again. I was abandoned once, so love must be unsafe. You build a case against your own potential, and the evidence is always your past. But what you forget is that your past isn't a prophecy. It's a perspective, one version of events through one lens of self, shaped by moments you didn't always choose or understand. And the longer you live through that filter, the smaller your future becomes. You stop reaching, you edit your desires, you accept limits that were never yours to carry. You define yourself by who you were at your worst, not by who you could be at your best. But the past is not a prison. It's a place you pass through. It shaped you, yes, but it does not own you. The trap lies in its certainty. It tells you you've been figured out when really you've barely begun. Your past may have built the foundation, but only you decide what goes on top of it. Overpersonalization Trap. The overpersonalization trap is the mental reflex that makes everything feel like it's about you. Someone's silence becomes rejection. A short reply becomes proof they're mad. A friend's distance, a boss's mood, a stranger's look, all interpreted as reflections of your flaws, your worth, your mistakes. You walk through the world scanning for signs you've done something wrong, carrying the heavy assumption that other people's emotions are mirrors of your failures. This trap doesn't start from vanity. It starts from vulnerability. Deep down, you want to feel safe, accepted, seen. So when someone pulls away, your nervous system fills in the blanks. It must be me. Because blaming yourself is painful, yes, but it's also a kind of control. If it's your fault, at least there's something you can do about it. If you caused it, maybe you can fix it. But that control is an illusion, and it comes at the cost of peace. You begin to shrink yourself, over-explain, apologize for things no one noticed. You rehearse conversations, obsess over tone, replay moments trying to decode hidden meanings. Meanwhile, the world moves on, people dealing with their own wounds, their own distractions, their own storms, but you stay trapped in self-blame, living inside stories that were never yours to carry. The truth is, most of what people do has nothing to do with you. Their moods, their choices, their silences, it's their weather, not your reflection. But the trap convinces you to internalize it all, to make yourself the cause of pain that isn't yours. And in doing so, you drain your energy trying to fix things that were never broken by you in the first place. You become a problem that doesn't exist, simply because you kept writing yourself into stories where you were never even in the cast. Success is your self-worth trap. The success equals self-worth trap is the invisible tether between what you achieve and who you believe you are. It's the belief that your value rises and falls with your accomplishments, that if you win, you matter, and if you fail, you disappear. Your self-esteem becomes conditional, your identity becomes performance, and the moment you're not producing, climbing, impressing, you're no longer sure you have the right to feel proud, loved, or even enough. This trap is reinforced everywhere. You're praised for productivity, celebrated for milestones, admired for outcomes. You're taught that success equals proof you're smart, disciplined, worthy of admiration. So you start chasing it not just for progress, but for permission to like yourself, to feel safe, to finally breathe. But the problem with tying your worth to success is that success is always unstable. It's external, it's fleeting, and even when you reach it, it demands more. You win, but it doesn't feel like winning. You accomplish, but you don't arrive, because the goalpost moves the moment you get there, and in that quiet aftermath, a terrible realization creeps in. If your worth depends on achievement, you'll never be allowed to stop. You'll never feel secure in your own skin unless the world is clapping. This trap doesn't just exhaust you, it erases you. You begin to fear rest. You downplay joy unless it's earned. You distrust love that shows up when you haven't achieved anything impressive. And the deeper tragedy is that you start treating yourself like a project, not a person. But you were never meant to be validated by your output. You were meant to be valued simply because you exist. Moral rigidity trap. The moral rigidity trap is the belief that your values, your sense of right and wrong, your moral framework are not just true for you, but universally correct. That your lens is the right lens, and any other way of seeing the world is not just different, but dangerous, misguided, or wrong. It feels like clarity. It feels like strength. But beneath it is fear, the fear that if you loosen your grip, everything might unravel. This trap doesn't always show up as arrogance. Sometimes it wears the mask of conviction, loyalty, principle. You're passionate about justice, truth, or goodness, and that passion is real. But the danger comes when it hardens into certainty, when you stop listening, when you start filtering people into categories, with me or against me, good or bad, evolved or ignorant. You forget that most people aren't immoral. They're just operating from a different story, a different wound, a different map. Moral rigidity shrinks your world. It makes complexity feel like a threat. You stop asking questions and start defending conclusions. You mistake discomfort for corruption. You confuse disagreement with harm, and suddenly, growth becomes betrayal. Empathy feels like weakness. You can't sit in the gray without trying to color it black or white. And in that space, relationships fracture. Not because someone is bad, but because you've stopped believing they could be good through a different lens. You isolate, certain you're standing in truth, not realizing you've built a fortress that love, nuance, and even truth itself can't always enter. The trap tells you compromise is selling out, but sometimes it's just remembering that other people's moral compasses aren't broken. They're just not yours, and that doesn't make them less human. It makes them human too. Complex equals superior trap. The complex equals superior trap is the seductive belief that the more intricate, intellectual, or difficult an idea is, the more valuable or true it must be. Simplicity starts to look naive. Clarity feels unsophisticated. You chase depth, not for understanding, but for status. You begin to treat confusion as intelligence and complexity as proof of depth. You start to believe that if something is easy to grasp, it must be shallow. If it's accessible, it must be incomplete. This trap often comes from a place of deep insecurity, masked as discernment. You fear being ordinary, misunderstood, or seen as simplistic, so you armor yourself with abstraction. You overthink, you overexplain, you seek systems, philosophies, and language that sound impressive even when they don't help you feel or live any better. You want your ideas to be admired, even if they disconnect you from the very people you're trying to reach or from yourself. But truth doesn't owe you complexity. Sometimes the most profound truths arrive quietly. You are enough. Let go. Love is the point. This moment is all there is. These truths don't need big words or complex frameworks to be powerful, but the trap convinces you they must be missing something, that you're missing something, that to be taken seriously, you must be hard to understand. And in chasing cleverness, you often lose connection to others, to simplicity, to your own heart, because wisdom isn't about sounding smart, it's about seeing clearly. Complexity can impress minds, but simplicity, it changes lives. Yet the trap tells you to keep building higher when what you really need is to come back down to earth, where the real truth has been waiting all along. Helping equals healing trap. The helping equals healing trap is the tender, dangerous belief that if you pour yourself into saving others, fixing them, guiding them, holding them together, you will somehow repair what's broken inside you. That if you show up for enough people, love hard enough, give deeply enough, you'll finally feel whole. It's compassion wrapped in desperation, a bleeding heart offering itself as a bandage, hoping that someone else's healing will echo back and patch your own wounds. This trap feels noble. It feels selfless. You become the listener, the caretaker, the one everyone leans on. You know how to show up for pain. You've lived in it, and so you offer comfort with a kind of urgency, because helping them gives your own suffering a purpose. But underneath the giving is an ache. If I can save them, maybe I can save myself. But healing isn't transferable. You can't fix your abandonment by never leaving others. You can't quiet your shame by making others feel worthy. You can't rewrite your own story through someone else's recovery. And the more you try, the more invisible you become in your own life, because you're always the helper, never the one allowed to fall apart. You become addicted to being needed. You confuse codependency for care. You call burnout devotion. And the cruel irony? The more you give, the more forgotten you often feel, because you're using other people's healing as a mirror, and when it doesn't reflect what you hoped, the emptiness deepens. You wonder why you're still hurting, still hollow, even after all you've done. But you were never meant to vanish into someone else's rescue. You can love others fiercely and still not use them as a substitute for your own salvation. Healing doesn't happen through saving. It happens through turning inward and realizing that you too are someone worth saving. Procrastination as personality trap. The procrastination as personality trap is the belief that your struggle to start, finish, or follow through isn't a behavior. It's who you are. You don't just say, I put things off. You say, I'm lazy. I'm a mess. This is just how I've always been. And that quiet, relentless narrative takes root. It's not that you procrastinate. It's that you are a procrastinator. Permanently, shamefully, fatally. This trap doesn't help you change. It buries you, because once delay becomes identity, effort starts to feel pointless. You begin to expect failure. You plan with guilt already attached. You sit frozen not because you don't care, but because deep down, you've already decided you're not someone who can. And the longer you stay stuck, the more the shame grows. The more the shame grows, the harder it is to move. And soon, it's not the task you fear, it's what doing it says about you if you fail. But procrastination isn't proof of laziness. It's often proof of fear, of overwhelm, of perfectionism, of exhaustion masquerading as apathy. Sometimes your mind delays because it doesn't feel safe to begin. Sometimes your body pauses because it's burned out, not broken. But this trap doesn't let you see nuance. It turns a coping mechanism into a character flaw. And so you stop giving yourself grace. You stop asking what you need and instead punish yourself for what you didn't do. But procrastination isn't a personality. It's a symptom, and you are not your delay. You are the one underneath it, still capable, still worthy, still allowed to begin again, even if it's slow, even if it's late, even if it's today. Overreflection Trap. The overreflection trap is the quiet assumption that if you just think hard enough, dig deep enough, analyze long enough, you'll unlock progress. That reflection is the doorway to healing, clarity, and growth. And the more you reflect, the closer you'll get to becoming whole. So you reflect constantly on every word you said, every decision you made, every emotion that flickered through your body. You replay the past like a loop, convinced the answer is buried somewhere in the reruns. But there's a sharp edge to this trap, because reflection isn't always insight. Sometimes it's just rumination dressed in smarter clothes. Sometimes it keeps you stuck in patterns instead of freeing you from them. You think, I'm processing, when really you're avoiding. You mistake circling for movement. You confuse self-awareness with transformation. And worst of all, you start to believe that if you haven't found the solution yet, you must be missing something inside yourself. Over-reflection becomes a maze with no exit. You examine every memory, every failure, every interaction, believing there's always more to decode. And while you're busy turning inward, life keeps moving. Opportunities pass. Healing pauses, because real change doesn't happen from thinking alone. It comes from doing, risking, trying, even before you're sure. But the trap tells you to wait, to figure it all out first, to gather every answer before you act. And so reflection becomes paralysis. You become the observer of your own life instead of the participant. And the tragedy is, the very tool meant to empower you starts to drown you in doubt. Reflection isn't wrong, but it was never meant to replace motion. Sometimes the next step isn't deeper understanding. It's letting go of the need to understand everything and moving forward anyway. Suffering significance trap. The suffering significance trap is the deeply emotional belief that the more you hurt, the more meaningful your life must be. That pain is proof of depth, struggle is proof of purpose, and the people who carry the heaviest wounds must somehow be the most real. You begin to equate hardship with value. You wear your pain like a badge, not because you want pity, but because some part of you believes it makes you matter more. This trap forms where trauma meets identity. You survive something, and in the wreckage, the world feels different. Simpler joys feel shallow. Peace feels suspicious. You start to think that if you're not suffering, you must be avoiding something. That happiness is only for those who haven't looked life in the eye. And you may not say it aloud, but deep down, comfort makes you uncomfortable because you've come to believe that meaning must be earned through pain. You romanticize the weight you carry. You chase depth in despair. You see lightness as detachment and joy as naivety. And slowly, you build a life that revolves around your wounds, not to wallow, but because they've become the only compass you trust. You think, if it hurts, it must be honest. If it's heavy, it must be real. If I'm suffering, then I must be doing something important. But pain is not proof of meaning. It's just proof that you're alive, that you've felt deeply, that you've endured. And yes, some of the richest wisdom comes from walking through fire. But fire isn't where you're meant to live. The trap convinces you that healing cheapens your story, that ease erases your depth. But maybe the greatest significance isn't in how much you've suffered, but in how gently you let yourself come out the other side. Avoiding conflict equals peace trap. The avoiding conflict equals peace trap is the comforting but corrosive belief that silence equals harmony, that if no one's yelling, no one's hurt, that if you keep your thoughts to yourself, keep the waters calm, keep everyone comfortable, you're creating peace. You swallow your discomfort, nod when you want to scream, agree when you want to walk away, not because you're weak, but because you were taught that confrontation is danger, that honesty disrupts love, that conflict is failure. This trap feels safe. It feels mature. You take pride in being the easy one, the one who doesn't cause problems. but what you're really doing is disappearing. You mistake self-abandonment for kindness. You confuse quiet for connection. You equate avoidance with grace, and all the while your resentment builds quietly beneath the surface like pressure in a sealed jar, unspoken, unacknowledged, but growing. Because peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of truth. Without truth, the calm you protect is fragile, performative, and brittle. You can't build real intimacy on eggshells. You can't feel seen in a room where your voice is always muted. You might be keeping others comfortable, but you're keeping yourself invisible. And eventually, the relationship, be it romantic, familial, or professional, becomes more about preservation than authenticity. Avoiding conflict doesn't preserve peace. It preserves pretending. And pretending costs more than any argument ever could. It costs your boundaries, your needs, your voice, your sense of being known, and the longer you stay silent, the more you teach people that your silence is consent, that your tolerance is agreement, that your comfort doesn't matter. True peace isn't passive. It's built through honesty, through discomfort, through the courage to rupture the surface to heal what's underneath. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is stop pretending everything is fine. Unworthiness Core Trap. The unworthiness core trap is the painful, often hidden belief that something is fundamentally wrong with you, not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. It's the sense that no matter how much you succeed, how much love you receive, how many people validate you, you are still, deep down, not enough. You can't name exactly why. You just feel defective, like you came into the world broken, and everything since has been a performance to hide it. This trap is cruel because it doesn't scream, it whispers. It slips into your decisions, your relationships, your inner voice. You question compliments, you brace for rejection, you lower your standards because asking for more feels greedy. Even when life is going well, a part of you waits for it to fall apart because some quiet shame tells you you're not someone who gets to have peace, success, love. You don't sabotage your life because you're reckless. You sabotage because you don't believe you deserve better. You attach to people who reflect that unworthiness. You settle, you overgive, you people please, you try to earn what should be yours by birthright, belonging, but no amount of external proof ever silences the internal verdict. And that's what makes this trap so relentless. You keep chasing healing outside while the wound lives inside, whispering that even healing itself is something you're not truly worthy of. But that belief was never yours to begin with. It was absorbed from rejection, from trauma, from moments too early to understand, but too painful to forget. It's not truth, it's inheritance. And the more you believe it, the more you shape your life to match it. Not because it's real, but because you keep mistaking the wound for your reflection. Constant readiness trap. The constant readiness trap is the exhausting belief that you must always be braced for impact, always scanning for the next threat, the next failure, the next moment everything might fall apart. It's the nervous system on high alert, the mind rehearsing disaster in a loop, the body tense for a future that hasn't happened yet. You tell yourself it's being smart, being responsible, being realistic, but what it really is fear dressed as control. This trap often forms in the aftermath of chaos. You live through the unexpected, the heartbreak, the loss, the betrayal, and now your brain refuses to be caught off guard again. So you plan for every outcome. You anticipate disappointment. You manage every emotion by preparing for its destruction. Hope feels dangerous. Joy feels naive. Calm feels suspicious. And rest, it feels reckless. You don't allow yourself to exhale, because what if that's the moment everything collapses? What if relaxing means missing the warning sign? So you live in a state of quiet tension where even good things feel fragile because you're too busy preparing for them to end. But constant readiness isn't safety. It's self-imprisonment. It keeps you suspended in a life you can't enjoy, a body you can't soften, a moment you can't trust. you're not living, you're rehearsing survival. And the tragedy is, the pain you're trying to avoid is already here. Not because disaster struck, but because you're treating every calm as the eye of a storm. Life isn't asking you to be naive, it's asking you to be present, to understand that vigilance is a response, not a home. You don't have to earn your peace by anticipating the worst. Sometimes the real strength is in finally allowing yourself to feel safe. Role fusion trap. The role fusion trap is the subtle but consuming belief that what you do is who you are, that your job title, your relationship role, your responsibilities, parent, partner, provider, leader, artist, student, aren't just parts of you, but the whole. You start introducing yourself as your function. You measure your worth by how well you perform. You confuse your role with your identity until you no longer know where the label ends and you begin. This trap doesn't show up as crisis. It shows up as purpose. You find meaning in being needed, in being good at something, in showing up reliably, and it feels like strength, like clarity. But slowly, you disappear beneath the mask. You stop asking what you want because your role already answers that. You stop feeling because your duty doesn't leave space for it. You shrink your inner world to fit the expectations of others and call it maturity. And then something shifts. The job is lost. The kids grow up. The project ends. The relationship changes. And what's left? An ache, an emptiness, a disoriented self who spent so long becoming useful that it forgot how to simply be. You try to rest and feel guilty. You try to explore and feel lost. Because without the role, you don't know how to define yourself anymore. You don't know who you are when no one's clapping, depending, or watching. But you are not your title. You are not your output. You are not the way people benefit from you. Those things are expressions, not definitions. You existed before the role, and you will exist after. But the trap tells you the opposite, that if the role goes, you go too. And so, you hold on tight, even as it quietly erases you. Unchangeability trap. The unchangeability trap is the quiet resignation that settles in when you start believing, this is just how I am, that your habits, your flaws, your fears, your pain aren't patterns, but permanent. You stop seeing yourself as someone in motion and start seeing yourself as a fixed point. You tell yourself you're too old, too broken, too stubborn, too damaged, and you slowly surrender, not because you're at peace, but because you've stopped believing change is possible. This trap feels safe because it relieves you of hope. Hope is heavy when it's been disappointed too many times. So instead of risking more failure, you accept the familiar discomfort. You give your anxiety a crown and call it your personality. You treat emotional wounds like character traits. You say, I just don't trust people. I'm not disciplined. I can't love fully, as if those truths are carved in your bones, not shaped by your story. And slowly, the identity of the stuck becomes more comfortable than the uncertainty of trying again. You stop growing, not because you can't, but because the trap has convinced you that trying is delusional, that wanting more is foolish, that dreaming differently is for someone else. But nothing in you is set in stone, not your patterns, not your pain, not even your personality. Neuroplasticity exists, hearts soften, beliefs shift, behavior changes, but only if you stop mistaking your history for your limit. The unchangeability trap whispers, you'll always be this way. But that's not prophecy, it's fear, pretending to be truth, and the cost of believing it is a life lived smaller than the one you're still capable of becoming. Invisible Rulebook Trap. The invisible rulebook trap is the unconscious obedience to rules you never agreed to, but still live by. Rules like, don't speak until spoken to. Success must look a certain way. Don't upset people. Keep the peace at all costs. These rules were never handed to you directly. You absorbed them through culture, family, silence, fear, and now, without realizing it, You shape your life around them, mistaking their weight for truth. This trap is dangerous because it feels like normal. You don't even notice the rules. You just feel the guilt when you break them. You say yes when you want to say no and call it being polite. You overwork yourself to exhaustion and call it being responsible. You stay small to avoid discomfort and call it being realistic. You feel the pressure, but not the source. You obey without knowing who's watching. And when life feels tight, when your joy is buried, when your path doesn't feel like your own, you rarely blame the rules. You blame yourself. Why can't I just be happy with this? Why do I always feel like I'm failing? But you're not failing. You're just living under a rule book no one ever asked you to question. The rules don't scream, they whisper. Be good, be quiet, be impressive, be safe. But beneath them is the quiet sacrifice of your own voice, your own rhythm, your own truth. And the longer you follow them blindly, the more your life feels technically correct, but emotionally hollow. You don't need to burn the book, you just need to see it. Because once you name the rules, you can decide which ones were never really yours. And that's when freedom begins, not in breaking everything, but in finally choosing what to follow. Overapologizing trap. The overapologizing trap is the instinct to say, I'm sorry, before you even ask yourself if you did anything wrong. It's the automatic assumption that if there's tension, discomfort, or disapproval in the room, it must somehow be your fault. You apologize for things outside your control. You apologize for existing too loudly, for having needs, for taking up space, and over time, I'm sorry becomes less about accountability and more about survival. This trap is usually born in places where peace was fragile, where avoiding conflict meant staying safe, where being agreeable was how you stayed loved. You learned that smoothing things over quickly was more important than expressing yourself honestly. So you became small, accommodating, hyper-aware of how others feel, while completely detached from your own feelings. You apologize not to repair, but to prevent. You apologize not from guilt, but from fear. And the worst part is, the world often rewards this. People praise you for being so thoughtful, so easy to be around, but deep down, you start to vanish. You stop trusting your own perspective. You begin to wonder if everything is your fault, because the habit has made you forget how to discern between genuine accountability and emotional self-erasure. Over-apologizing isn't humility. It's self-doubt leaking out through your language. And every time you say, I'm sorry, when what you mean is thank you, excuse me, or simply nothing at all, you reinforce the belief that you're inherently wrong. But you are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be misunderstood without begging for forgiveness. You are allowed to exist without apology. And unlearning this trap isn't about becoming harder. It's about finally learning that you were never the problem in the first place. Identity Overcorrection Trap. The identity overcorrection trap is the quiet panic that shows up when you feel lost, uncertain, or in between. And instead of sitting with the discomfort, you grab onto a fixed absolute identity to feel safe again. You start over-defining yourself with labels, roles, belief systems, or aesthetics, not because they fully fit, but because ambiguity terrifies you. You want to know who you are, so you cling to something that feels solid, even if it costs you growth. This trap doesn't always look rigid. It often hides behind confidence, clarity, even empowerment. You say, this is just who I am. I've figured it out. I don't do that, and build a fortress around the version of you that makes the most sense right now. But deep down, it's not rooted in truth. It's a defense against confusion, against the chaos of not knowing, against the fear that if your identity is fluid, you might disappear entirely. And so you lock into a version of yourself too soon. You shut doors you haven't explored. You refuse change because it threatens the narrative you've crafted. You stop asking hard questions because you're afraid of the answers. You confuse authenticity with consistency. You call yourself aligned, but inside, something still aches. because you're performing a self that may no longer fit. The trap tells you that certainty equals identity, that defining yourself sharply will protect you from feeling lost. But growth often looks like softening, not sharpening, like loosening your grip on who you thought you had to be, so something truer can emerge. You don't need to brand yourself to belong. You don't need to have it all figured out to be real. You are allowed to shift, to evolve, to contradict yourself. You are not a label. You are a living thing. Future self-fix trap. The future self-fix trap is the comforting illusion that a better, wiser, more disciplined version of you is just around the corner, and that version will handle everything. She'll start the routine. He'll end the toxic relationship. They'll write the book, pay the debt, heal the wound. It's not that you're avoiding action, it's that you're outsourcing it to someone who doesn't exist yet. Someone perfect, someone not you. This trap feels like optimism, but it's really delay dressed as hope. You imagine your future self with clarity, motivation, strength, and follow-through, and it soothes the discomfort of staying still today. You feel safe because something is coming, even if nothing is changing. But the truth is, that future version of you can only be built from now, and every time you delay change, you bury that version a little deeper beneath avoidance. You think, once things calm down, once I feel ready, once I'm in the right mindset. But readiness doesn't come before the leap. It comes from the leap. And while you wait, life doesn't pause. The consequences compound. The habit hardens. The pain deepens. You don't grow into your future. You decide into it. You don't become new by imagining it. You become new by doing something different, even if it's awkward, messy, small. The trap convinces you that procrastination is preparation, that fantasy is a plan, but your future self isn't coming to rescue you. They're waiting to be built, choice by uncomfortable choice, here in the present. And they can't begin until you stop dreaming about them and start acting like them.